My birth mother desperately concealed me within the absolute darkness of a hidden wall compartment. My naive mind honestly assumed she was just initiating a thrilling game of hide and seek. But she suddenly forced a thick strip of cloth deep into my mouth to gag me, fixing me with a profoundly solemn piercing glare. No matter what horrific atrocities occur outside, you absolutely must not make a single sound. Peering through a tiny microscopic peephole in the hidden compartment, I watched all 132 members of my household get utterly slaughtered, their mangled corpses turning our ancestral home into a bloody house of tears. The mastermind leading this merciless carnage was an elegant, refined man clad in pristine white robes. None other than Songming, the esteemed Grand Secretary of the Great Xia Empire. He gently wiped the crimson fluids from his blade with a pristine white cloth. He casually used a snow-white silk handkerchief to wipe the fresh crimson blood off his blade. A collection of utterly worthless, low-born peasants actually harbored the delusional fantasy of toppling a powerful, centuries-old aristocratic clan. They completely overestimated their own pathetic strength. And that is precisely why every single member of his bloodline richly deserved to be systematically butchered at the hands of a low-born peasant like me. During this exact world-shattering year, I was a mere 7 years old. And for the absolute first time in my life, I learned the true meaning of deep, unadulterated hatred. I painfully trampled over the blood-soaked bones of my slaughtered kin, scrambling through a filthy dog flap to escape the heavily guarded estate, before blending into the massive, chaotic crowds of refugees fleeing the capital of Chang'an. My late father and mother had only ever instilled in me the noble virtues of etiquette, justice, honor, and shame. Yet they completely failed to prepare me for how to identify the calculating wolves hidden in human skin. Consequently, I was captured and violently trafficked like livestock multiple times over, fleeing frantically only to be brutally recaptured, escaping once more only to be dragged back to captivity yet again. My stubborn mind completely refused to grasp the concept of absolute submission, nor did I possess any desire to desperately flatter my ruthless captors. As a direct consequence, I was subjected to wave after wave of merciless, bone-breaking beatings. Later down the line, lured by the simple, innocent promise of a single piece of candy, I was easily deceived and abducted by a seemingly kind-hearted, gentle-looking poison master. He forcefully dragged me to a remote, abandoned village to use my living body as a human test subject for lethal toxins. At an age when most children naturally crave sweets, I developed a profound lifelong loathing for candy. During those agonizing years, existing in that living hell was a fate infinitely worse than death itself. And so, out of sheer desperation, I executed my very first intentional murder. No calling it a learned skill would be an absolute lie. It was nothing more than my raw, primal beast-like instinct for survival. Sometime later, a catastrophic, widespread famine aggressively swept across the entire nation. The illustrious fourth prince personally arrived at the front lines to spearhead the disaster relief efforts. The desperate citizens praised him continuously, claiming he was not only as breathtakingly gentle as finest jade, but that he harbored an intense, boundless love for his suffering people. Yet on that fateful day, as I stood amidst a sprawling sea of starving, dying refugees, the moment a skeletal, emaciated hand reached out to grasp the edge of his luxurious robes, his royal brow violently furrowed in extreme disgust, failing to mask the deep-seated instinctive revulsion flashing across his handsome features. With a single, bone-chillingly cold command hanging in the air, I was brutally, savagely kicked directly in the face by his heavily armored Imperial guards. My frail body absorbed the full crushing momentum, sending me flying a staggering 3 feet backward through the dirt. My vision instantly blurred into a spinning, dizzying void of consciousness, as a blazing, white-hot, agonizing sting violently radiated across my battered face. A stream of thick, warm crimson fluid slowly traced a path down my shattered cheek. What a joke, loving his desperate subjects like his very own children. Neat. It was nothing more than a grotesque, dark, comedic farce. My fingers instinctively slipped into my robes to clutch a lethal dosage of toxic powder. He is merely a starving, helpless refugee. And sharp, authoritative female voice suddenly echoed through the chaotic air. A pristine, snow-white silhouette abruptly dropped to the earth directly in front of my battered form. An incredibly soft silk handkerchief was gently pressed against the bleeding laceration on my face. She was none other than Song Ziyuan, the highly esteemed fiancée of the malicious fourth prince, the flesh and blood daughter of my sworn mortal enemy, the ruthless Grand Secretary Songming. Against all twisted laws of reality, she had heroically saved my life. To think that that hyper-hypocritical monster, Songming, actually managed to sire such a genuinely pure and compassionate daughter. If my beloved father and mother were still breathing this very day, I likely would have been nurtured into someone just as radiantly beautiful as her. Consequently, I systematically infiltrated her inner circle, becoming Song Ziyuan's elite personal handmaiden, operating under the untraceable deceptive alias of Yunjin. The monstrous butcher who systematically erased my entire bloodline was standing right before my eyes, at the mere prime age of 36 years old. He maintained a profoundly noble, ultra-refined public facade, fully ascending to the legendary rank of Prime Minister of the Great Xia Empire, holding the absolute, unchallenged reins of control over the entire imperial court. I possessed the lethal means to instantly end his breathing with a simple handful of toxic powder. But the agonizing passage of time had blessed me with a terrifyingly deep layer of patience. How could I possibly allow a demon like him to slip away into death so flawlessly and easily? Once my physical wounds healed and I fully debuted in the Grand Estate, the dense crowds of noble retainers would constantly lock onto my form with raw, stunned admiration. However, to our utterly defenseless lowborn servant trapped in a gilded cage, possessing legendary beauty is merely a direct invitation to catastrophic disaster. Exactly 3 short months down the line, Songming's singular precious male heir dropped dead. A horrific, aggressively advanced venereal disease claimed his life at the tender age of 17. Absolutely zero souls suspected that my venomous hand had orchestrated his gruesome demise. He had been completely blinded by raw animalistic lust, vilely plotting to violate my body the absolute second Song Ziwan left the estate. The harder I desperately begged and wept, the more his sadistic excitement spiraled out of control. However, under the flawless silent operation of the neurotoxins I slipped into his system, his pathetic anatomy flat out refused to function or achieve an erection, aside from covering my face in his repulsive, filthy saliva. The absolute failure could achieve nothing of actual substance. Day after agonizing day, the slow-acting curse built up within his bloodstream, until the lethal chronic poison finally erupted into full-blown organ failure. It was an elite custom-brewed toxin that perfectly mirrored the gruesome symptoms of terminal syphilis. The entire high society Song estate plunged into an ocean of profound crushing misery. A broken white-haired patriarch forced to bury his own young black-haired flesh and blood. The grand halls echoed with endless throat-shredding wails of pure agony, and that beautiful tragic symphony of despair actually carried a striking resemblance to the horrific, blood-curdling screams of my own kin as they were butchered all those years ago. Song Ming's eyes filled with a shattering, profound grief. I watched from the shadows as his fists clenched with pure fury, his fingernails digging brutally deep into his own palms, until a stream of dark crimson blood leaked out, staining his pristine white robes. Meanwhile, standing just a short distance away, I casually used a clean white silk cloth to polish a tiny porcelain vial, my lips curling upward into a chillingly cold, sinister sneer, a perfect mirror of the exact expression he wore when he slaughtered my family. I wanted him to taste the agonizing torment layer by layer, forcing him to endure the exact crushing pain I survived. But losing a single son, that was nowhere near enough. On the horrific day, my entire household was ruthlessly exterminated. There wasn't a single surviving soul left behind to even weep for the dead. Back then, nestled deep within my late mother's womb, was an unborn child who never even got the chance to see the light of day. Half a year later, Song Ming officially adopted a child from a side branch of the clan, to raise beneath his own knee as the official heir. The aristocratic Song family was a powerful, deep-rooted dynasty, with immense wealth and sprawling branches, meaning the sudden demise of one young master barely dented their absolute influence. Furthermore, he still possessed a highly influential sister, who reigned supreme as the absolute empress of the Great Xia Empire. The fourth prince born from her womb carried the noble blood of the Song family, and their grand strategy was to propel the fourth prince onto the dragon throne as emperor, while installing Song Ziwan as his imperial empress, ensuring the next ruler of the realm would remain a puppet completely under their control. What a brilliantly flawless, utterly perfect master plan they had mapped out. But how could I ever allow his grand ambitions to come to fruition? The foolish patriarch remained completely oblivious to the fact that his precious beloved daughter, Song Ziwan, actually harbored a deep unspoken resentment toward the fourth prince. As for the fourth prince himself, based on my meticulous long-term observations, he was nowhere near the gentle, benevolent saint he pretended to be in public. The fourth prince and his elite personal guard commander frequently visited the grand estate, and the disgusting way that guard commander stared at my body carried the exact same predatory, vile lust as Song Ming's deceased son. He was none other than Jiang Yan, the sole heir and golden child of the influential Jiang family, the right-hand enforcer of the fourth prince, a terrifying grand general, and a high-ranking noble born into immense privilege. He had already taken a primary wife and maintained 5 separate concubines in his manor, and he had clearly forgotten completely that I was the exact same starving, helpless refugee he had nearly stomped to death, like a worthless piece of street trash all those years ago. But my memory happens to be exceptionally, terrifyingly long. Out on the sprawling expanse of the royal hunting grounds, I dutifully maintained my position right by Song Ziwan's side as always, when a powerful arm suddenly wrapped violently around my waist and lifted me off my feet. Jiang Yan effortlessly hoisted my body up onto the saddle, before glancing back at Song Ziwan shouting, "I'm borrowing your maid for a moment. I personally guarantee I'll return her completely untouched." Beneath the bright, wide-open canopy of the afternoon sun, and right in front of countless watching eyes, He forcefully dragged me along as his horse galloped directly into the dense forest, instantly leaving my reputation and purity completely compromised. The sole reason he dared to execute such a brazen stunt was because he was absolutely completely certain that the aristocratic Song family would never choose to completely destroy their political alliance with the most highly favored powerful right-hand man of the fourth prince over a mere disposable servant girl. Not only would they refuse to retaliate, but if he officially requested my body, Song Ming would likely hand me over on a silver platter. But by what twisted logic does the world operate? Just because I am trapped in the identity of a low-born defenseless maid, does that mean I richly deserve to be treated like absolute garbage? Lest he forget, this is a dangerous, unpredictable hunting game, and the endless possibilities of what could happen out here are wildly vivid. However, who is truly the helpless prey and who is the ruthless apex predator remains to be seen. I have been patiently anticipating a golden opportunity like this for an exceptionally long time. Zhang Yan's deadly arrow flew with absolute pinpoint precision, ruthlessly striking a targeted man. That victim was no ordinary bystander, but rather a brilliant lowborn young military official who had risen from absolute poverty. A fiercely loyal, unyielding vanguard of the Crown Prince's faction. The malicious fourth prince relies entirely on the ironclad backing of the ancient aristocratic clans, whereas the Crown Prince stands firmly supported by the impoverished lowborn scholars. Tragically, the lowborn faction is on the absolute brink of being completely exterminated. Even the reigning emperor himself has been so thoroughly suppressed and dominated by Song Ming's absolute political tyranny that his fighting spirit has completely evaporated, causing him to abandon state affairs to desperately seek out immortality and divine Dao arts. This grand hunting event was strategically organized by the second prince, who is a fiercely loyal, card-carrying member of the fourth prince's elite cabal. Since it's a wild hunting excursion after all, it wouldn't be entirely out of the question for a few select individuals to be brutally mauled to death by apex predators. They intended to exploit this exact loophole to systematically eliminate their political opposition. Feast your eyes on that girl. That is the exact horrific fate that awaits anyone who refuses to obey. Zhang Yan's voice slithered into my ear like the chilling venomous hiss of a viper, slowly tracing a terrifying path across my sensory boundaries. I forced my entire physical frame to violently shudder with simulated paralyzing terror, which only caused Zhang Yan to break into a wildly arrogant, uninhibited roar of laughter. Meanwhile, the fourth prince, who has always been widely celebrated for his boundless benevolence and virtue, personally witnessed every single second of this horrific, abusive display. Yet he completely refused to utter a single syllable in my defense. It was an exact painful replay of the day Zhang Yan brutally kicked me into the dirt all those years ago, where the prince had merely offered a completely lazy, half-hearted slap on the wrist, muttering, "You really shouldn't inflict unnecessary violence on others." He was naturally blessed with stunning, exceptionally handsome features, as smooth and flawless as finest jade, possessing a pair of radiant bedroom eyes that seemed to view the entire world with absolute warmth. Every single word he uttered and action he executed was completely flawlessly beyond reproach. Yet in absolute reality, beneath that meticulously crafted layer of warmth lay a bottomless abyss of pure indifference, harboring a profound sociopathic inability to place his trust in a single living soul. He harbored nothing but an absolute unbothered detachment from the suffering of others. His calculative mind cared exclusively about the strategic balancing of political power and personal gain. And since I was merely a disposable, low-born maid stripped of any tangible strategic value, it was completely beneath his royal dignity to ever waste his breath sticking up for me. Ha 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 ha. Right on cue, a sudden violent ambush slammed directly into their path. That targeted military official knew perfectly well that this grand hunt was a fatal trap from the start. So why on earth did he choose to show up? Because the lowborn faction intended to launch a brutal counter-assassination of their own. Idiots swept up in the sudden chaos, Zhang Yan no longer had any spare attention to waste on me, ruthlessly chucking my body directly into the dirt as he engaged the attackers. Fortunately for me, the primary targets of the lethal onslaught were exclusively the fourth prince and Zhang Yan's elite inner circle, meaning the aggressive combatants harbored zero intention of targeting me. I immediately scrambled for cover, concealing my form behind a massive tree trunk. The brutal clash rapidly drifted deeper into the woods, the sounds of violence fading into the distance. The very second they completely vanished from my line of sight, I sprinted over to the fallen military official to urgently check his fading pulse. He hadn't completely crossed over into the afterlife just yet. I aggressively dug my thumbnail into his philtrum, forcing his consciousness back into reality. "Hang in there, sir. I am going to forcefully extract this embedded blade from your chest right now." The agonizing pain caused the young man's facial features to violently contort in pure torment. Yet he stubbornly refused to forget his manners, desperately gasping out a raspy thank you. My facial expression hardened into a profoundly solemn, deadly serious grimace. "You fools are being completely blind and reckless. Do you honestly believe that executing a single fourth prince will automatically secure victory for the crown prince? The emperor has a sprawling army of eligible sons. The ancient aristocratic clans can effortlessly swap him out and bankroll an entirely different prince. This brainless stunt of yours is literally handing a massive weapon directly to your enemies. And a terrifyingly sharp legal weapon at that, the outright assassination of an imperial prince. Do you truly possess zero fear that those ruthless aristocratic clans will exploit this treasonous charge to completely wipe the lowborn faction off the map? Was the horrific total annihilation of the Jin clan 10 years ago not a blood-soaked lesson enough? My voice trembled with a sudden wave of raw, hyper-intense emotion. However, I have formulated a flawless tactical counter-strategy. One that can completely shield the lowborn faction from total destruction, so open your ears and listen to me very carefully right now. I have formulated a brilliant counter-strategy that can completely shield the lowborn faction. Open your ears and listen to me very carefully right now. An entirely unidentifiable rogue faction of deadly assassins suddenly materialized in the dense forest today. It was a rogue assassin's stray arrow that accidentally struck you down. And the exact weapon currently buried deep inside your flesh will serve as your absolute ironclad proof. The moment the instructions left my lips, I forcefully grabbed his hand and slammed it directly against his open bleeding wound. Keep pressure on this yourself, OCK. I will leave the task of scrubbing and managing this active crime scene completely in your hands. I have pressing tactical business of my own that demands immediate execution. I pushed myself off the dirt, executing a crisp, highly decisive motion to strip off my heavy outer robes. What on earth do you think you are doing, Yoshi? The young official's face instantly flushed into a vibrant, brilliant crimson. His entire demeanor locked in a state of absolute hyperventilating panic. Rest your anxious mind, sir. I have zero intention of forcing you to take legal responsibility for this. Within seconds, I had stripped down completely to my thin snow-white inner tunics. I systematically stripped the blood-stained garb off a freshly deceased assassin, hurriedly slipping into the uniform before sprinting to track down the fleeing fourth prince and his retainers. My lady, might I inquire which noble household you belong to? The weakened young man called out from behind. I don't possess a home to return to, and I have long been stripped of both a father and a mother. My name is Yoon Jint, and I am merely a lowborn maid whom the eldest Miss Song kindly took into her care. Commit this to memory, you absolutely must not breathe a single word about me saving your life today. Lest you forget, my late father was once a fiercely upright, unbending military official just like you. Without wasting a single microsecond to glance back, I bolted straight into the dense tree line, relentlessly tracking the path of destruction all the way to the absolute edge of a jagged cliff. I arrived just in the nick of time to witness a lethal arrow flying straight toward the fourth prince's exposed chest. Meanwhile, his elite personal guard commander, Zhang Yan, was already fighting for his own pathetic survival, possessing absolutely zero spare capacity to even look after his master's safety. I launched my entire physical frame forward with explosive velocity, positioning my body as an absolute human shield directly in front of the vulnerable fourth prince. Fortunately, I was wearing a heavily reinforced set of hidden metal armor beneath the uniform, meaning the sharp arrowhead completely failed to pierce through my vitals. Yet the pure kinetic energy packed into the projectile was overwhelmingly massive. The crushing impact violently destabilized our footing, sending both of us plummeting off the edge of the abyss. Midair, I tightly locked my arms around the fourth prince's torso, twisting our bodies with a violent lurch, ensuring that my own frame would take the bottom position while he remained securely on top. The howling, ferocious gales of the canyon aggressively ripped the black assassin mask off my face, completely exposing my raw, unguarded features to the open air. My gaze locked directly onto his wide-eyed, completely panicked, and deeply stunned expression. Your Imperial Highness, let my broken flesh serve as your absolute cushion, exchanging my worthless existence for your absolute unblemished safety. This lowly handmaid Yunjin only begs that you treat my beloved young mistress with absolute kindness for the rest of your days. The reality was simple: the fourth prince could absolutely be permitted to die, but he absolutely could not be allowed to expire in such a politically worthless, unimpactful manner. His premature demise right now would completely fail to reverse the tragic destiny of the lowborn scholars, nor could it ever alleviate the systemic oppression inflicted upon the millions of wretched, impoverished peasants struggling at the bottom of the food chain. The political waters of this empire have already grown exceptionally muddy and corrupt, so it only makes perfect sense for me to dive headfirst into the storm to violently orchestrate the shifting winds. Directly beneath the cliff lay a vast, deep expanse of roaring ocean water, and with the heavy structural support of the hidden metal armor protecting my torso, the statistical probability of my survival remained exceptionally high. And just as I calculated, my pulse remained steady and I survived the terrifying fall. Yet the violent, chaotic undercurrents of the crashing waves, instantly and aggressively ripped my grip away, separating me from the fourth prince. To my absolute utter bewilderment, the legendary prince turned out to be completely incapable of swimming, harboring what appeared to be a deep-seated paralyzing phobia of deep water. After a few frantic, pathetic splashes, his heavy physical form began rapidly sinking into the pitch-black ocean depths. What an absolute, utterly useless royal, I mentally scoffed, diving beneath the surface to swim toward him like a bullet. I aggressively hooked one arm securely around his broad back to stabilize his flailing form, while my remaining hand firmly cupped the back of his head, pressing my lips against his to gently lock our mouths together and breathe life directly into his lungs. Immediately after, I firmly hooked my arm around him and swam hard toward the surface. In a state of pure panic, his arms instinctively locked around me with a desperate, crushing grip, absolutely terrified that letting go meant plunging into a watery grave. Clinging together to a piece of driftwood, we drifted aimlessly until we washed ashore on a deserted island. When darkness fell that very same night, the highly privileged, pampered fourth prince pathetically succumbed to a violently raging high fever. Watching him shiver uncontrollably, I couldn't help but note how utterly useless he was. Left with absolutely no choice, I begrudgingly wrapped my arms around his body to share my body heat. In his feverish, semi-conscious delusion, his arms instinctively locked right back around me, clinging desperately to the only source of pure warmth available in his freezing world. My physical energy was completely spent and exhausted, causing me to slowly drift into a deep, heavy slumber before I even realized it. At the break of dawn, his intense burning gaze remained fixed on my face for an exceptionally, lingeringly long period of time. The exact millisecond I forced my heavy eyelids open, my raw line of sight collided head-on with his completely unguarded, startled eyes. To my absolute surprise, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic swept across his features as he abruptly untangled his arms and released his grip on my body. I calmly reached out to press the back of my hand against his forehead, noting the fever had completely broken. Pushing myself off the ground, I casually stated, "Your Imperial Highness, you were burning up with a severe fever throughout the night. Our proximity was merely an unavoidable tactical measure of survival, so there is absolutely no need to overthink it. Where on earth do you think you're going? I intend to forage around the area for some wild fruit to sustain us. Does your highness prefer to remain stranded here alone? Or would you rather accompany me? Let's go together." The calculating, deeply manipulative fourth prince, who habitually wore a meticulously crafted, flawlessly benevolent mask to deceive the world, finally allowed a genuine glimmer of raw, unpolished sincerity to bleed through his expressions. After being thoroughly trapped alongside me on this isolated patch of land, he was also a severe textbook germaphobe, constantly wasting energy attempting to fix his appearance to look neat, orderly, and completely immaculate despite our primitive circumstances. It honestly made perfect sense now. Back then, when my filthy, mud-caked hand desperately clutched the hem of his luxurious royal robes, his internal revulsion and disgust must have been absolutely off the charts. Day after repetitive day rolled by, yet we failed to spot a single rescue vessel or scout appearing on the horizon. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the rocky shoreline, watching the endless cycle of the rising and falling tides. Your Highness, is there a single soul out there in the world whom you genuinely miss? Absolutely no one. Well, I deeply miss my young mistress. I am absolutely certain she is exhausting every resource available to track down my location. As for your biological family, they are undoubtedly searching for you as well. I let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh before descending into a heavy absolute pool of silence. After a profoundly long, drawn-out pause, he broke the quiet, directing a deeply perplexed, inquisitive question toward me. Why on earth did you ruthlessly gamble your own life just to rescue me? Perhaps it's simply because you are my young mistress's esteemed betrothed. Or perhaps it's because all those years ago you were standing right alongside her, when she saved that wretched, freezing beggar. His piercing gaze remained locked intensely onto my face. This superficial explanation was nowhere near enough to truly satisfy his cynical mind. An individual cursed with an inherently detached, cold-blooded core will always find it utterly impossible to believe someone would throw away their life out of pure gratitude. Furthermore, his dark underlying instincts were absolutely spot on. He had once actively looked down on my existence with pure indifference, giving me absolutely zero logical justification to act as his savior. Yet the undeniable physical reality remained that I had pulled him from the jaws of death. I forced my features to contort into an expression of slight, exasperated frustration. My physical frame simply moved faster than my conscious thoughts. In that split second of sheer chaos, there wasn't a single spare microsecond to rationalize anything. So how am I supposed to lay out a perfectly logical explanation for you now? Perhaps it's merely because I am cursed with an overly compassionate soul. Or perhaps because in my eyes your highness has never been a truly evil monster, making you a life well worth preserving. Then he pressed further, asking, if I were stripped of my grand title as an imperial prince, and were merely a common citizen of the realm, would your hand have still reached out to rescue me? So it turns out he was hyper aware that the endless flattery showered upon him by the world was entirely transactional, aimed solely at the immense political authority tied to his royal title. I let out a soft chuckle. I put my life on the line for a single human being, and it never had a single damn thing to do with your elevated social hierarchy. At that, a soft, genuine smile finally broke across his flawlessly handsome face, a look of breathtaking, razor-sharp male beauty. And for once, that smile carried a faint, undeniable trace of unmanufactured sincerity. On that fateful afternoon, he opened up to me, revealing I once possessed a younger brother born from the very same mother. My sibling was exponentially more brilliant than I could ever hope to be, far more silver-tongued, charismatic, and effortlessly articulate. To put it simply, he completely outclassed me in every single human metric. His imperial mother and our powerful uncle Songming showered my brother with immense affection, poured every ounce of their vast resources into meticulously grooming him for the throne, while their collective patience with my existence completely evaporated into thin air, leaving me trapped in a freezing abyss of absolute unbothered neglect. I remember exhausting every brain cell to compose a beautiful poem dedicated to maternal love, only to be met with biting mockery and a harsh public reprimand from my own royal mother, who venomously declared that I was wasting my life obsessing over utterly worthless drivel, calling me a stagnant, pathetic failure who would never amount to anything of substance. This toxic dynamic persisted until one fateful, chaotic afternoon, when my golden child brother accidentally slipped and plunged into deep, suffocating waters. Though they managed to fish his body out, he succumbed to a brutally severe raging fever, which permanently ravaged his brilliant mind, leaving him completely mentally incapacitated. The very second he became broken, their toxic behavior underwent a total dizzying reversal. They suddenly began smothering me with intense, hyper-vigilant concern for my well-being, lavishing me with immaculate protection and meticulously engineering my path to absolute power, while my broken little brother was instantly relegated to the forgotten, invisible shadow I used to inhabit, completely neglected and completely abandoned by everyone. In the past, he had merely assumed that they simply didn't harbor any love for his person. But later on, he finally came to a harsh, cold realization. It turned out they were completely incapable of loving anyone at all. The harsh truth was that those power-hungry monsters merely required a highly competent, perfectly malleable royal prince who could effortlessly secure their clan's political dominance. So what happened afterward? What ultimately became of your little brother? The poor boy ended up sneaking out alone to play near the riverbanks once more, and tragically plunged into the deep, suffocating waters a second time. By the time the guards finally discovered his location, his lifeless body was just bloating, drifting aimlessly on the water's surface, his flesh horribly swollen, and his facial features completely disfigured beyond recognition, leaving absolutely zero trace of the brilliant, beautiful child he had once been. His voice dropped down to a painfully low, fragile whisper, and shockingly, not a single soul in that entire godforsaken palace shed a solitary tear for him. No wonder he harbored such an intense, paralyzing phobia of deep water. He was deeply terrified of losing his sanity. Terrified of dying and exponentially more terrified of being completely forgotten and left to rot after his demise. If the clan fails to locate my body soon, they will undoubtedly pivot, immediately mobilizing to place their bets on an entirely different prince, executing the exact same tactical maneuver they used when they chose to bankroll my rise to power. Does your Imperial Highness genuinely desire to reclaim your birthright? Because if you do, I will gladly stand by your side and help you paint the capital red to seize it. I offered him a soft, deeply reassuring smile. Every single day following that conversation, I dove headfirst into the treacherous ocean currents to scout out an escape route. And without fail, the exact moment I swam back toward our camp, I could spot Pei Zhao standing frozen on the distant shoreline from miles away, his anxious, hyper-focused gaze locked intensely onto the exact trajectory of my return. The second my feet touched the shallows, signaling my safe return, a brilliant, unadulterated spark of pure relief would instantly illuminate his dark eyes. This fragile routine persisted until one fateful excursion, where my scouting mission dragged on for a grueling 2 days and 2 nights straight, just as the very first rays of dawn began to crack through the horizon. I finally managed to navigate my way back to our secluded beach, only to discover him standing in the exact same spot looking like he hadn't moved an inch. Before my exhausted body could even finish wading ashore, he was already sprinting toward me with absolute reckless abandon, actively splashing directly into the deep, terrifying waters that usually paralyze his entire soul. This royal prince who had spent his entire life being meticulously restrained, flawlessly polite, and severely crippled by an intense textbook case of germophobia, suddenly and violently threw his arms around my completely drenched, seaweed-covered body, squeezing me tight. Don't you dare ever venture back out into that abyss again. We are never going back to that toxic empire. We're staying right here, choosing to abandon the capital forever. Meant he was actively throwing away his divine royal lineage, his immense prestige, and his shot at the supreme throne. willingly opting to strip himself completely bare of worldly power just to grow old alongside me on this isolated patch of land. Throughout the course of those grueling, agonizing 48 hours, he had been left entirely alone to stare out into the vast, indifferent expanse of the roaring ocean, desperately waiting for the return of a solitary soul whom he wasn't even certain was still drawing breath. And during one of those agonizing, endless hours, he made a definitive, monumental decision. If that missing soul had truly not abandoned him to rot, he was entirely prepared to renounce his royal inheritance just to spend eternity by her side. At that exact moment, I instantly knew he was completely and utterly done for. This seemingly detached, fiercely guarded young prince was in absolute reality completely starved of affection and desperately craved genuine love. When he was ruthlessly targeted for assassination, when he was drowning in the suffocating currents, and when he was burning up with a raging fever. During every single terrifying dark moment of absolute despair, I had never once turned my back on his wretched soul. Instead, time and time again, my hand reached down to pull him back from the brink, forcing my existence to become the solitary beacon of light in his fractured world. For a youth who had been strictly denied real affection his entire life, how could he ever resist becoming utterly addicted to that blinding light? Yet I simply looked up at him with a soft smile and whispered, "Your Highness, I have successfully mapped out our ultimate escape route through the waves. We can finally return to the capital and claim what is yours." The tyrannical Prime Minister Song Ming remains completely oblivious that the perfect imperial puppet he meticulously bankrolled and thrust toward power is already slipping entirely outside the boundaries of his control. With every single midnight that bleeds into a haunting nightmare, I am violently forced to witness my heavily pregnant mother groveling in the dirt, desperately begging for her life right beneath his callous feet. Yet he didn't harbor a single shred of hesitation before plunging a freezing razor-sharp steel blade directly into my mother's swollen abdomen, viciously twisting the hilt with a sickening grinding motion to casually shred and tear through the living flesh and blood of his victims. He merely flashed a sadistic smile, declaring that the lives of low-born commoners are nothing but disposable ants. If that is his philosophy, then the lives of his entire aristocratic bloodline richly deserve to be brutally extinguished by the precise hands of this very same ant. We meticulously constructed a sturdy wooden raft, stocked it with gathered rations, and after braving 5 grueling days and nights on the chaotic seas, we finally breached the imperial capital. Just as I calculated, the greedy noble clans had already moved on, aggressively bankrolling a brand new prince. The impressionable 8th prince had been quickly transferred to the Empress's palace to be groomed as her own. The exact moment Pei Zhao unexpectedly marched back into the palace gates alive, the Empress and Song Ming were struck with an intense mixture of sheer shock and manic ecstasy. Word around the court was that the Empress even shed actual tears of profound relief. After all, the blood currently pulsing through Pei Zhao's veins belongs entirely to the elite Song clan. The ancient aristocracy prizes bloodlines above all else, making Pei Zhao the absolute most ideal puppet they could ever hope to place on the dragon throne. But will he ever truly remain content to serve as a brainless, obedient pawn for them to manipulate at their absolute whim? As for the fallout from the failed assassination plot, because the lethal weapons recovered from the crime scene bore the exclusive crest of the imperial family, their toxic suspicions instantly swerved toward the other competing royal princes. The conniving second prince, having served as the primary coordinator of that ill-fated imperial hunt, was naturally thrust straight into the direct line of fire to take the fall. He bore the absolute brunt of the supreme political backfire. Making matters worse, he had been acting under the direct insidious instructions of Song Ming, and had indeed committed a string of heinous crimes to ruthlessly eliminate upright loyal officials. The truth was, that young military official wasn't the only innocent soul brutally slaughtered on that fateful day, even though Zhang Yan knew perfectly well that the surviving official was fabricating a blatant lie. He didn't dare breathe a single incriminating syllable to expose the contradiction. While the 4th prince's ultimate fate remained completely up in the air, Zhang Yan, in his prestigious capacity as the Left Guard Senior General, had already been stripped of his military rank and thrown into a cold dungeon for failing his protective duties. If he were slapped with an additional ironclad charge of deliberately orchestrating the assassination of a government official, his chances of staying alive would be absolutely zero. He was nowhere near stupid enough to willingly walk into his own execution. Consequently, he consciously and strategically chose to play along, shifting the entire weight of the blame directly onto the vulnerable second prince. In the end, that utterly useless, incompetent second prince was served up as the perfect scapegoat. And just like that, another one of Song Ming's premium chess pieces was completely obliterated. My ultimate grand strategy is to systematically rip out his deadly fangs and claws one by one. That elite, untouchable, aristocratic empire he takes immense pride in is about to be thoroughly dismantled from the inside out by a mere insignificant ant, whom he has always looked down upon with absolute contempt. Pei Zhao desperately urged me to return with him to his luxurious imperial estate, but I flatly rejected his offer. Instead, I returned to the Prime Minister's manor and confessed everything to Miss Song Ziwan, strategically omitting only the critical segment involving my secret deal with the military official. Are you genuinely harboring romantic feelings for the fourth prince? No, then why on earth did you ruthlessly gamble your own life just to save his skin? He is your designated future husband after all, if he had failed to make it back alive. My forced betrothal would have simply shifted to the newly favored 8th prince. Would you have recklessly thrown your body in front of a blade for the 8th prince as well? Just how many spare lives do you think you possess? Listen to me very carefully, my dear girl. Your life is not a single bit more lowly or disposable than anyone else's in this kingdom. If that man genuinely treasured you with his entire soul, and was a true soulmate whose heart beat in perfect sync with yours, then I would have absolutely no right to object. But the harsh reality is that he is nothing of the sort. So promise me you will never play the part of a reckless fool ever again. She was fiercely declaring that my life, the life of a mere lowborn handmaid, was not a single bit more lowborn or disposable than anyone else's, and that anyone else explicitly included the highly revered, golden-blooded 4th prince. During the grueling months, I had completely vanished from the face of the earth, in a sprawling, hyper-prosperous metropolis as massive as Chang'an City. She was the solitary soul who had spent endless, agonized nights losing sleep over my safety. A sudden, overwhelming lump formed in my throat as I nodded silently, fighting back tears. I frequently catch myself wondering how a profoundly hypocritical, malicious monster like Song Ming could have ever managed to sire and raise an incredibly gentle, brilliantly rational, and fundamentally noble soul like Song Ziwan. Since her early childhood, she had been ruthlessly groomed to become the perfect future empress, and the older Song Ming couple had subjected her to a regime that was nothing short of brutally tyrannical. The slightest deviation from perfection or a single minor slip-up would instantly trigger severe screaming or violent family punishments. Yet she possessed a profound, insatiable passion for literature, and it was undoubtedly the wisdom penned within those hidden pages that sculpted her into the remarkable woman she is today. Her mastery over the zither was hailed as an absolute spectacle across Chang'an, leaving even the elite musicians of the imperial palace utterly filled with envy. Tragically, the profound melancholy woven into her melodies remained completely misunderstood by everyone, until a fateful afternoon 2 years ago, deep within a secluded bamboo forest, when the sorrowful notes of her music echoed through the trees, causing a passing young scholar to abruptly halt his footsteps. He casually retrieved his parchment and inkstone, and with a flurry of elegant sweeping brushstrokes, he vividly captured the raw emotional landscape of her soul onto the paper. From that pivotal moment onward, she frequented the bamboo forest every single month to play, and that mysterious youth would flawlessly materialize without fail. They never exchanged a single spoken word, nor did they ever cross social boundaries. Yet their spirits had long since achieved an absolute unspoken telepathy. But eventually, reality crushed her dreams, and she heartbreakingly tasked me to deliver a final message to that youth, notifying him that she would never return because she was bound for marriage, marrying whichever royal prince the elite clans chose to bankroll just to secure the empress's crown. Was a cruel, unyielding destiny that she was completely powerless to rewrite. True to form, the very second the 4th prince safely breached the capital, the older Song couple immediately ordered Song Ziwan to deliver premium restorative tonics to his estate. At the prince's manor, Pei Zhao and Song Ziwan walked side by side down the garden path, looking like a picture-perfect couple of elite visual status. Yet their body language screamed absolute soul-crushing emotional detachment. Meanwhile, Zhang Yan and I trailed closely behind them like silent shadows. Pei Zhao had personally flexed his political authority to pull Zhang Yan out of that freezing dungeon, which was a classic textbook example of his manipulative tactical playbook. By bestowing a calculated crumb of royal benevolence, the entire Zhang clan would naturally weep with profound gratitude, and pledge their absolute, undying loyalty to his cause. He would even intentionally look the other way when his subordinates committed minor infractions, ensuring he held total permanent blackmail material over their heads. Furthermore, even if he were to replace his personal guard commander, could he ever truly guarantee the new recruit would act as a human shield and throw away their life for him? He was inherently too cynical to ever buy into such blind devotion. The exact moment Zhang Yan's eyes landed on my figure, his jaw dropped in absolute shock that I was breathing. He remained completely oblivious to the fact that the savior who rescued his master was actually me. I chose to completely ignore his presence. Yet, my icy indifference only seemed to fuel his irritating, aggressive behavior. My hyper-focused gaze remained entirely locked onto Song Ziwan's movements, while Zhang Yan's eyes were completely glued to my body. On this specific afternoon, I had intentionally styled myself in a silk gown with a subtly lower neckline than usual, perfectly accentuating the pale contour of my neck and my distinct collarbones, despite my absolute refusal to acknowledge his existence. His actions grew increasingly bold and utterly audacious, suddenly throwing his heavy arm around my torso to pull me into a tight grip, clamping his hand firmly over my mouth to completely suffocate my ability to scream, before planting a forceful, highly aggressive kiss straight onto my forehead, whispering, "Look at you. Yeah." Because I am nothing more than a lowly housemaid in his eyes. He genuinely believes he possesses the absolute right to degrade and mistreat my body at his whim. Therefore, his miserable life is officially forfeit, and he deserves to rot in hell. In the very next microsecond, a heavy lightning-fast fist violently collided straight with the side of his jaw. How dare you lay a single filthy finger on what belongs entirely to me? The habitually composed, impeccably polite Pei Chao suddenly transformed into a completely unhinged feral wolf driven by pure predatory rage, his veins bulging and his eyes practically bleeding with absolute malice, as he mercilessly unleashed a brutal, continuous barrage of heavy strikes directly into Jiang Yan's skull. Seeing that the sheer brutality of the beating was actively crossing into lethal territory, Sung Jiwan and I desperately threw our bodies forward to restrain his movements, crying out, "Your Highness, I am entirely unharmed, so please, I beg of you, cease this violence at once. If your fist connects one more time, you will literally murder him where he stands. A precious soul whom I have meticulously shielded and haven't even dared to lay a single finger on. Yet this pathetic, audacious worm actually dared to defile her, Yan Sen Senye." Regarding the absolute chaos that transpired here this afternoon, if a single soul breathes a solitary syllable about it, I will personally guarantee your execution. He delivered the terrifying freezing command with absolute unyielding authority. Immediately after, he firmly grabbed my wrist, dragging me directly into the privacy of his personal quarters, barking orders at the servants to immediately fetch a basin of warm water. With meticulous, trembling hands, he began to frantically scrub away at the skin of my forehead over and over again. "That is quite enough, Your Imperial Highness. The skin has already been cleansed completely bare." I gently intercepted his severely bruised, swollen hand, uncorked a nearby vial of medicinal salve, and began delicately spreading the soothing ointment across the raw, bloody knuckles of his fist. "Your Highness, you absolutely should not have allowed yourself to act with such reckless, unhinged impulse today. The disgusting piece of trash richly deserved to be slaughtered. Why on earth is Your Highness acting like an emotional, petulant child this afternoon? I have simply looked the other way and overindulged his atrocious behavior for far too long, spoiling him to the point where he completely forgot his place and lacked basic boundaries. Your Highness, if the woman Jiang Yan chose to aggressively assault today, had been nothing more than an ordinary, nameless servant girl of the estate, or perhaps a version of myself who hadn't yet bled beside you through a brutal survival crisis, would your blade have still swung with such protective fury? The harsh truth is you wouldn't have spared her a second glance. Xiao Qin, Your Highness, you carry the heavy lineage of an imperial prince, and in the near future, you are highly destined to ascend as the absolute supreme sovereign of this entire empire. Yet the vast overwhelming majority of the citizens inhabiting this realm are individuals exactly like myself, wielding zero influence, possessing zero status, and living lives as fragile as roadside weeds. If it is within your absolute capacity as their future ruler, I humbly implore Your Highness to extend a fraction of your royal protection over those who cannot defend themselves. Deep within the confines of her private chambers, Song Ziyuan paced back and forth across the floor, her delicate features utterly twisted with an expression of sheer panic and anxiety. I have never in my entire life witnessed the fourth prince lose his absolute psychological composure like that. He has undoubtedly fallen profoundly, genuinely in love with your person. But the imperial bloodline is inherently cursed with ruthless apathy and zero room for real affection. If my imperial aunt, the empress, or my ruthless father ever uncovers this secret, they will absolutely never allow you to live. You need to pack your things and flee this capital immediately. Even at this critical, dangerous turning point, her primary instinct was to fiercely worry about my personal safety. I simply offered a slow, deliberate shake of my head. I am not running away. She clearly harbored a severely naive, completely unrealistic view of her tyrannical father's terrifying reach. The elite noble clans hold enough absolute monopoly to effortlessly blot out the sun. Where on earth could a nameless maid like me possibly hide? Besides, every single strategic move I have carefully orchestrated from the very beginning has fundamentally been a high-stakes suicidal gamble with a 99% chance of death. My physical existence is currently far too weak and utterly insignificant if I refuse to ruthlessly gamble with my own life as currency. How could I ever dream of successfully bringing down an untouchable aristocratic empire? But even if I am ultimately doomed to perish in the dirt, I am going to make absolutely certain that my demise carries an immense devastating price tag. I harbor a deep underlying desire that this godforsaken world might eventually see far fewer horrific tragedies like the one that completely shattered my own family. On paper, this violent altercation shouldn't have escalated into a major political crisis. After all, Zhang Yan had first committed a severe dereliction of his duty as a royal guardian, followed by a disgusting display of utter moral corruption and lack of discipline. Furthermore, the defenseless girl he had aggressively assaulted was officially recognized as the literal savior who pulled the fourth prince from the jaws of death. No matter how you look at it, he didn't possess a single leg to stand on morally, and serving him a brutal physical lesson was entirely justified under the circumstances. His crimes were certainly vile, but normally wouldn't have carried a mandatory death sentence. Yet, an outcome that caught every single noble clan completely off guard was that Zhang Yan actually died. His physical wounds stubbornly refused to heal over time, eventually rotting away into a horrific gangrenous mass that claimed his life. Absolutely no one suspected that I was the phantom mastermind who administered the lethal poison. From the precise millisecond his filthy lips aggressively forced that kiss onto my skin, the microscopic toxin seamlessly breached his oral cavity, systematically invading his internal organs. I had intentionally formulated a highly sophisticated, slow-acting venom. Under normal circumstances, his miserable body should not have decomposed anywhere near that rapidly. However, I had critically miscalculated a single chaotic variable. I never anticipated that Pei Zhao would unleash such a feral bone-shattering beating upon him. Nor did I foresee that the raw internal trauma would accelerate the poison's activation at such a terrifying speed. The agonizing rot kicked off right on his swollen, disfigured face, before violently metastasizing down his physical frame and his limbs, liquefying his internal organs from the inside out. The sheer, unadulterated level of agonizing torture he endured was easily 10,000 times more horrific than the physical pain he inflicted on my child self. When he callously kicked me into the dirt all those years ago, the elite Jiang clan is a massively influential, high-ranking powerhouse in the aristocracy. For their precious sole male heir to be brutally beaten to death by the fourth prince over a mere housemaid, that crossed the line from a private scuffle into an absolute cataclysmic political scandal. This was no longer a trivial domestic matter. The exact moment Songming deployed his heavily armed guards to violently drag me away in chains, I knew with absolute certainty that my chances of survival were practically zero. To the elite, a maid's life is nothing. The life of a lowly servant is worth absolutely nothing to these elites, and they will undoubtedly deploy the most sadistic, stomach-churning torture tactics to break my body, as that is the only way they can even remotely alleviate the burning rage consuming their black hearts. Yet a profound sense of pure, unadulterated ecstasy washes over me. Pei Zhao delivered a phenomenal beating, and Zhang Yan's gruesome death is an absolute masterpiece of poetic justice. The toxic political alliance between the tyrannical Prime Minister Songming and the elite noble houses, as well as the fragile relationship between the aristocracy and the fourth prince, has finally fractured under a catastrophic, completely irreversible rift. The structural crack is destined to expand aggressively day by day, and that once impenetrable network of deeply entrenched, mutually protective aristocratic families will officially cease to be an unbreakable fortress. I am currently bound in heavy iron chains within the damp, pitch-black torture chambers of the Jiang estate, as one gruesome blood-stained executioner's tool after another is relentlessly tested on my flesh. Lord Jiang's eyes are completely bloodshot, overflowing with a psychotic, murderous hatred. The agonizing trauma of losing his only male heir has pushed him straight to the brink of absolute insanity. He possesses zero political leverage to touch a single hair on the fourth prince's head. So he is sadistically channeling the entire concentrated weight of his fury into ripping my body apart. But what this arrogant fool remains completely oblivious to is that my body was meticulously conditioned with lethal poisons. Every single drop of blood coursing through my veins is a weaponized concoction of pure venom, as he ruthlessly lacerates my flesh and leaves me completely drenched in my own warm blood. The stagnant air inside this room is quietly becoming heavily saturated with my toxic airborne blood vapor. This underground dungeon is entirely sealed off from any outside ventilation, and because he spends endless days and nights obsessively torturing my physical frame, breathing the exact same air and locking himself in this confined space with me. Inhaling the lethal invisible particles becomes an absolute mathematical certainty. He doesn't have much longer left to draw breath on this earth. In fact, he is destined to suffer an agonized demise that is 1,000 times more horrific than mine. All those years ago, he was the primary eager lapdog who ran errands for Songming, personally leading the merciless, blood-soaked massacre that wiped out my entire Jin clan. Now both he and his wretched son are doomed to suffer violent, unnatural deaths, ensuring the elite Jiang bloodline is permanently erased from the face of the earth without an heir. Karma is an absolute unyielding force of nature. Yet a wave of profound sorrow hits me because I am still so incredibly powerless. The sheer capacity of my solitary existence is far too weak and insignificantly small, and trying to single-handedly crush the ancient aristocracy feels like an ant trying to shake a massive towering tree. I have pushed my broken body to its absolute limits just to orchestrate things to this specific stage. But I know my beloved father and mother treasured me with all their hearts, so they surely won't blame me for falling short. It is just so terrifyingly dark down here. In absolute reality, I have always harbored a paralyzing phobia of the pitch black. I miss their warm embraces so incredibly much. Suddenly, within that endless soul-crushing abyss of the torture chamber, the heavy iron door is violently and urgently thrown open with a deafening crash, allowing a blinding, piercing beam of natural sunlight to violently flood the room. I instinctively squint my eyes, completely overwhelmed by the sudden illumination, and through the shifting, overlapping silhouettes of light and shadow, that noble youth who was always supposed to remain an impeccably poised, gentle scholar, now stands before me with a face completely consumed by sheer panic and absolute terror. Peijao gently scoops up my fragile, near-lifeless body into his arms, carrying me out of the Jiang estate, while the chaotic echoing sounds of a full-scale imperial raid and asset seizure roar behind us. The elite Jiang clan, having been officially exposed for framing and ruthlessly slaughtering loyal imperial ministers. Embezzling military supplies and acts of high treason has officially been condemned to complete clan extermination. Was it Ziyuan who secretly provided the ironclad evidence to thoroughly bury the Jiang clan? He nodded slowly. Peijao was nowhere near an incompetent, empty-headed royal prince, though on the surface he appeared to share a harmonious, codependent alliance with the aristocracy. The cold reality was that he had never placed his absolute trust in a single soul. Therefore, it wasn't the least bit surprising that he secretly held damning dossiers on the elite clans. Yet how could a cunning fox like Song Ming possibly tolerate him causing such catastrophic chaos? As if completely reading the unvoiced confusion written all over my face, he locked his remarkably gentle, warm gaze onto mine and murmured, "Zhang Yan's demise was directly triggered by my own hands," meaning the entire Jiang clan was bound to inevitably pivot and turn their deadly blades against me. My prime minister uncle naturally had to ruthlessly liquidate the Jiang family to ensure my absolute safety. I instinctively knitted my brows in deep skepticism. Fine, you caught me. The truth is, I personally forged the highly incriminating secret correspondence between the Jiang clan and the crown prince. He smiled faintly, stating that this was the very least he could do after I repeatedly gambled my life to save his. A sudden sharp thrill of dark satisfaction violently surged within my chest. Against all historical odds, my high-stakes gamble had paid off spectacularly. The exact millisecond Peijao lost his absolute mental composure and nearly beat a man to death for my sake. I placed a lethal bet that if I were to be brutally tortured or broken behind the closed doors of the Jiang estate, he would completely bypass political caution and make a chaotic enemy out of the entire Jiang clan just to rescue me, and would go so far as to systematically dismantle their entire noble house down to the bedrock for my honor. Initially, I hadn't allowed myself to harbor even a shred of genuine hope for this suicidal wager. I inherently distrusted his deceptive royal nature, and I put absolutely zero faith in a concept as fragile and fleeting as romantic love. Yet against every cynical expectation, he actually breached those dark gates and came for me. So this is what it truly feels like when you are drowning in the absolute pit of despair, and someone willingly tears through heaven and hell just to bring you back to the surface. Rest easy now, there is absolutely no need to worry anymore, he whispered softly, and completely erase those wretched monsters from your mind. Let us finally go home. The intense raw emotion swirling within his eyes was a deeply agonizing display of uncontainable heartbreak. Home? Just what kind of home do I even have left to return to? My true home was completely reduced to blood and ashes by the elite houses a lifetime ago. The Jin clan was a modest, loyal faction that His Imperial Majesty had personally elevated to balance the court. Annihilating the Jin family was effectively equivalent to severing the Emperor's own dominant right hand. And now, by brilliantly manipulating Peijiao's royal hands to completely butcher the Jiang clan, I have achieved perfect symmetry by effectively hacking off Song Ming's most lethal right hand. Yet another premium powerful chess piece has been thoroughly obliterated by my design. And this particular piece happened to be an absolutely critical pillar of their corrupt foundation. Next up on my execution list is the Grand Mastermind himself, Song Ming. For a deeply entrenched, cunning old fox like Song Ming, it is highly unlikely that he hasn't harbored severe doubts regarding the absolute authenticity of those intercepted letters. However, his deep-seated paranoia is an absolute psychological disease. He would effortlessly choose to brutally massacre 100 innocent souls, rather than risk letting a single potential traitor slip through his fingers. He is a mastermind who constantly calculates 10 steps ahead for every single move he executes, proving his absolute cruelty by ensuring that right before I was handed over to Zhang Yan's psychotic father, he personally forced a lethal, slow-acting concoction of poison straight down my throat. It was a highly insidious concoction designed to systematically drain my physical vitality and condemn me to a painfully short, agonizingly fast-approaching death. Even if I somehow miraculously managed to survive the horrific torture at the hands of Zhang Yan's father, I would still be completely on borrowed time and destined to drop dead shortly after. Therefore, he didn't care in the slightest that Peijao had personally intervened to rescue my broken body. But what truly mattered most to a narcissist like him was preserving his facade as a profoundly noble, refined, and impeccably dignified statesman from start to finish, ensuring his own treacherous hands remained completely untainted and clean. In the eyes of the public, my ultimate demise would be blamed entirely on the psychotic Lord Jiang, leaving him completely blameless and entirely disconnected from the horrific crime. He calculated that Pei Zhao would never allow himself to harbor a deep-seated animosity or create a political rift with him over a mere disposable servant girl. However, he critically miscalculated one absolute fact: my physical body had been relentlessly conditioned with lethal toxins, rendering me fundamentally immune to 100 forms of deadly poison. He remains entirely oblivious to the reality that the seemingly insignificant, helpless ant he has always utterly despised, the low-born peasant whom he treats like absolute garbage, is actively orchestrating a cataclysmic, world-altering storm of pure vengeance. The exact stomach-churning manner in which he deployed the most barbaric, completely subhuman tactics to ruthlessly butcher my entire Jin clan all those years ago is the exact multiplied agony I am going to personally force him to swallow down his throat. I am going to meticulously hoist him up to the absolute apex of political power and prestige. And at the precise moment he reaches his most glorious high, completely intoxicated by his own triumph, I will utterly annihilate every single thing he holds dear, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Everything he arrogantly believed he had permanently strangled in the cradle is about to explode into existence. I officially ascended to the position of head housekeeper within the prince's sprawling estate, wielding absolute authority over Pei Zhao's daily dietary regimen, personal living arrangements, and every single operational matter within the inner courtyard. Pei Zhao maintained zero psychological defenses against me, granting me unrestricted, effortless access to the highly classified content of his private study, allowing me to uncover the most deeply buried explosive secrets of the entire royal household. On that specific afternoon, the cunning Song Ming personally paid a visit to the estate, coordinating a ruthless conspiracy to thoroughly frame and destroy the crown prince during the Empress Dowager's upcoming birthday gala. Their highly calculated strategy was to target both the crown prince and Madame Xiang, the lawful wife of Li Yun, the prominent minister of rights, by surreptitiously spiking their drinks with a highly potent, unyielding aphrodisiac, before orchestrating a scenario to trap them together inside the exact same locked bedchamber, exposing them to the entire imperial court in a scandalous, career-ending act of infidelity. Though the elite Li family boasted a prestigious century-old aristocratic lineage, the unique variable was that Li Yun's lawful wife, the revered Madame Xiang, actually hailed from a humble, non-noble family of military background connected to the general's estate. For that specific reason, the influential Li clan had always maintained a fiercely independent, strictly neutral stance amidst the chaotic, blood-soaked factional warfare of the court. But if the crown prince were caught violently violating the honor of the Li family's matriarch, the proud Li clan, having suffered such a devastating public humiliation, would naturally be forced to pivot their immense political weight entirely behind the fourth prince. Simultaneously, the crown prince would be permanently ruined, heavily vilified by the masses for assaulting an official's wife, providing the elite clans with the ultimate flawless justification to officially strip him of his royal title. This sinister plot is exceptionally vicious and utterly venomous, yet it stands as a brilliant, masterfully orchestrated strategy designed to kill two birds with one single stone. Pei Zhao, however, visibly hesitated at the sheer cruelty of it. But the calculating Song Ming had only come to give a mandatory directive, not to humbly beg for his royal consensus. He callously argued that within the blood-soaked arena of court politics, there is zero room for gentlemen. He noted that every single sovereign in history had ruthlessly ascended to the imperial throne by walking over a mountain of corpses and a literal sea of blood. But by what twisted logic should that entirely innocent Madame Xiang be brutally sacrificed as mere collateral damage? Years ago, when that sadistic poison master dragged me to that remote village to weaponize my body, he would frequently vanish for days on end, locking me inside a pitch-black room to leave me entirely to my own miserable fate. Every single time I was starving to the point of absolute dizzying delirium, a sweet little village girl named Zhao Di would stealthily creep over, to sneak scraps of food through the cracks for me to eat. Hurry up and eat this quickly. Eventually, I successfully executed a lethal counterattack on that poison master, and broke free from my captivity. During the horrific famine that followed, Zhao Dai was mercifully taken in by the matriarch of the Li estate, Madame Xiang, while I was rescued from the streets by the noble Song Ziyuan. Years later, our paths randomly crossed once again in the bustling streets of Chang'an. She told me that Madame Xiang had graciously bestowed a new name upon her, calling her Xiang Kui, and had even personally taught her how to read-write and master the essential skills needed to survive with absolute dignity. In her glowing descriptions, Madame Xiang was exactly like Song Ziyuan, a profoundly gentle, rare, and fundamentally pure-hearted soul. An incredibly virtuous noblewoman of her caliber, absolutely did not deserve to become a disposable casualty in their toxic political warfare. Right before making his exit, Song Ming shot a deeply piercing, lingering glare directly at me, his gaze reflecting the exact same bone-chilling predatory malice from the day he butchered my entire clan. I strategically unleashed a barrage of violent, fragile coughs, making myself appear utterly weak, broken, and on the absolute brink of death. Satisfied that his slow poison was working, he smirked and departed. The moment he turned his back, a cold smile crept onto my face as well. He genuinely thinks he can completely obliterate the commoner faction and ruin the crown prince, but has he bothered to check if I would ever allow it? On the highly anticipated day of the grand birthday gala, Madame Xiang was subtly ushered into a secluded guest chamber under the guise of treating a sudden physical ailment. Her trusted guard Xiang Kui was nowhere to be found, and the substitute maid Xiang Qiu was an incredibly naive, incompetent amateur, who was effortlessly lured away from her post by the conspirators' agents. Meanwhile, Madame Xiang's noble husband Li Yun was aggressively cornered and aggressively delayed by a group of elite noble young masters. Right on cue. The crown prince suddenly experienced a severe wave of physical discomfort after consuming spiked food, and was intentionally guided by a plotting servant toward that exact same guest chamber to rest. I swiftly breached the perimeter and slipped inside through a window on the opposite side of the pavilion, only to discover that Madame Xiang was already completely unconscious, lying limp upon the bed. The bedding area was partitioned from the main parlor by a massive, intricately carved privacy screen, and right behind that structural barrier, the crown prince sat heavily by the table, his ears completely flushed crimson, irritably pressing his fingers against his pounding forehead. I calmly stepped forward out of the shadows. "Your Royal Highness," he looked up completely stunned to see my face. "Young mistress." Every single week, she would personally make a long trek to the slums on the distant outskirts, bringing the entirely destitute elders and vulnerable orphans who had no one to rely on crucial supplies, warm food, and clean clothes. During those visits, a kind-hearted young man would occasionally show up there as well, and the local street kids would all affectionately call him Brother Xing, swarming around him with pure, unadulterated excitement. The youth would regularly set up makeshift wooden tables and benches in the dirt courtyard, patiently teaching the impoverished children how to read and write. I found myself pulling up a seat right alongside them to learn as well. My grip on the calligraphy brush was consistently clumsy and incorrect, prompting the youth to instinctively wrap his fingers over mine, to gently guide and adjust my posture. The very millisecond our skin brushed together, he suddenly realized the intimate proximity and frantically withdrew his hand as if he had been burned. "My deepest apologies, young lady." "Whatever are you apologizing for? Is it perhaps because I'm a grown woman now that you suddenly find yourself unwilling to teach me, young master?" "No, that is absolutely not the case. In that case, simply treat me with the exact same casual ease you show the children." He nodded softly, agreeing to my terms. Yet his tutoring became intensely restrained from that moment on, deliberately avoiding even the slightest accidental physical contact with me. It was completely obvious that he possessed an exceptionally refined, noble upbringing, and I silently wagered he had probably never touched a woman's hand in his entire life. The mere act of our fingertips lightly grazing each other was enough to make his ears turn a deeper crimson than blooming peach blossoms. This gentle, pure-hearted youth known as Xing was none other than the crown prince himself. I cut straight to the chase, telling him that the matriarch of the Li clan, Madame Xiang, was currently trapped in the adjoining room completely drugged, and that he too had been insidiously spiked with a lethal aphrodisiac, before being intentionally lured to this exact location. "The elite noble clans are executing a plot to completely destroy both of your reputations. You need to move your legs and follow me right now." He offered zero resistance, allowing me to grab his hand and pull him out through the window. The vicious aphrodisiac was already aggressively taking over his system, and I could physically feel his palm tightly intertwined with mine, growing increasingly alarmingly hot by the second. Having practically grown up around the imperial courts, the palace layout was deeply familiar to me. I expertly bypassed the patrolling guards and navigated him into the nearest abandoned, forgotten palace pavilion. Suddenly, he violently wrenched his hand free from my grasp, stumbling blindly toward a nearby stone water well, and desperately began dumping bucket after bucket of the freezing well water over his burning flesh. "It is absolutely futile. That is a highly weaponized top-tier aphrodisiac," I stated coldly. "If you do not find a physical release, the sheer chemical potency will literally kill you." The elite noble clans are completely determined to ensure this plot succeeds at all costs, meaning they would have undoubtedly dosed you with the most unyielding, aggressive compound available. "You need to run. Leave this place immediately." He desperately tried to push me away to save my honor. Yet his voice was incredibly strained and completely raspy, while his bloodshot eyes were overflowing with a torturous level of agony and intense forced restraint. I locked my gaze directly onto his and spoke with absolute clarity. "Your Highness, your childhood pet name is Xing Xiaosuado. bestowed upon you because the night you drew your very first breath, the sky was ablaze with 1,000 brilliant stars. Once upon a time, you shared your youth with a constant companion, a young girl named Jin Yoon, so called because on the precise day she entered this world, the endless horizon was completely painted in breathtaking, vibrant clouds. You two were officially betrothed since infancy, growing up as absolute, inseparable childhood sweethearts. You were a remarkably brilliant, exceptionally scholarly boy from the start, while she, by contrast, was an absolute handful, a mischievous, chaotic little troublemaker. He could never properly calibrate his posture for wielding a writing brush. She absolutely loved dragging you along to scale massive trees just to catch cicadas. And during one of those chaotic escapades, you who possessed zero athletic skill for climbing suffered a nasty fall straight out of the branches, viciously tearing the flesh of your back open against a sharp wooden spike, and leaving behind a deeply jagged permanent scar. Because you were absolutely terrified that she would face severe violent punishment from the elders, you tight-lipped the entire incident and completely hid your injury from everyone else. Throughout those subsequent weeks, she was the one who stealthily snuck into your quarters every single day to tend to your wounds and change your bandages. But then the innocent Jin clan was ruthlessly framed by the corrupt network of elite noble houses, resulting in the systematic blood-soaked massacre of our entire family line. What absolutely no one in this empire realized, however, was that her desperate mother managed to cram that little girl into a hidden compartment behind the wall, forcing her to bear silent witness as her entire bloodline was brutally slaughtered in front of her eyes. You are truly my long-lost Yuner. The young prince was so overwhelmingly shaken by pure shock and intense emotion that the outer corners of his eyes flushed into a striking, was completely drenched, causing icy droplets of water to trace down the sharp, striking contours of his handsome face, gliding past his aggressively bobbing Adam's apple before pooling in the hollows of his collarbones, creating a visual that was intensely breathtaking and utterly intoxicating. I offered a firm nod, pressing my ice-cold palm flat against his fiercely burning cheek. Brother Xing, you are the absolute solitary beacon of hope for the commoner faction. And you are the ultimate weapon who will finally clear the stained name of my butchered Jin family. Therefore, you must survive this night no matter the cost. Intoxicated by the soothing, freezing sensation radiating from my skin, he instinctively leaned his face deeper into the palm of my hand, while the raw, blazing desire consuming his eyes became completely impossible to suppress any longer. I took a definitive step forward, wrapping my arms tightly around his trembling frame, and softly whispered directly into his ear, I am entirely willing to do this. Who could never quite master the correct posture for holding a calligraphy brush. I understood precisely what this ultimate sacrifice entailed, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had to save him. Yet it wasn't as if there were no other medical alternatives available to cure him. Nevertheless, I deliberately chose this specific intimate path. I needed him to forever owe me his very life, and I wanted him to be permanently consumed by an unpayable debt of guilt toward me. Deep down, he was still that exact same extraordinarily virtuous, unbelievably pure and somewhat shy boy from our innocent childhood days. But as for me, I had long since mutated into a completely different creature. I was no longer anywhere near kind or morally pure. In fact, I fully intended to ruthlessly weaponize his own innate goodness against him. The young man wrapped tightly in my embrace was radiating an alarming feverish heat, his racing heartbeat and ragged breathing completely descending into absolute chaos. A desperate burning kiss finally descended upon my lips, deepening with an unstoppable, fiercely passionate intensity. Afterward, the crown prince gently slid a breathtakingly exquisite jade bracelet over my wrist, whispering that this heirloom was personally commissioned by his late mother for his future empress. I absolutely cannot accept this, I protested. This artifact is far too incredibly sacred and valuable. I frantically tried to wrench it off my arm only to find it stubbornly locked in place. He gently enveloped my struggling hands to halt my frantic movements, before softly pressing his lips against the back of my hand in a tender kiss. This heirloom was always meant to belong to you from the very beginning. So this is merely returning a stolen treasure back to its rightful owner. The intense gaze he locked onto me, however, carried a strange, hidden layer of deep guilt. The tragic reality was that I had long since become unworthy of standing by his noble side. I had completely stopped believing in the illusion of true love a lifetime ago. It is time for me to make my departure. Let us meet 3 days from now at our secret sanctuary in the slums. I quietly navigated my way back toward the bustling grand birthday gala, only to cross paths with the highly anxious fourth prince Pei Zhao, who was frantically searching for me. I casually fabricated a lie, claiming I had simply lost my bearings in the massive palace, and he blindly believed my story, completely oblivious as I covertly hid the empress's bracelet beneath my long sleeve. Word quickly spread that the elite clans had triumphantly marched their massive entourage to catch the targets red-handed, only for their grand scheme to completely blow up in their faces, reducing the high and mighty aristocracy to a laughingstock. But the absolute pinnacle of dark comedy was what transpired. Inside a completely separate guest chamber down the hall, Songming's highly favored precious adopted son was caught dead in the act, tangled in bed with one of the emperor's personal imperial concubines. To make matters worse, that exact concubine was a secret spy Songming had carefully planted by the sovereign's side. Consequently, that perpetually poised, elegantly refined, and untouchable mask Songming always wore instantly turned an absolute terrifying shade of ashen gray, his overwhelming fury causing him to violently tremble in the middle of the imperial court. His beloved adopted son was instantly slapped with a mandatory sentence of public execution. So what if he practically rules the entire empire from the shadows? He still operates under the absolute scrutiny of imperial law, and must appease the burning outrage of the masses to maintain his fragile grip on power. Faced with absolute ruin, he acted with ruthless, ice-cold precision, completely severing all political ties and publicly disowning his own adopted son without a shred of mercy. He even went so far as to righteously petition His Majesty to ruthlessly purge the adopted son's entire collateral family branch to prove his own absolute innocence. They are literally tearing each other to pieces from the inside out. Watching these elite noble dogs chew each other alive is an absolute unparalleled thrill. I subtly cast a deeply approving knowing glance toward the young imperial censor, who hailed from the humble commoner faction. An absolute masterclass execution, it truly made my anonymous tip-off worthwhile, guiding his forces directly to the scandalous betting site. Songming's arrogant adopted son wasn't exactly running a maiden voyage with that imperial concubine. They had been hookups for a hot minute. And just how did a disposable servant like me uncover such classified scandal? Because within a dazzling, sprawling metropolis as monumental as Chang'an, the high and mighty aristocrats who look down on the masses represent a microscopic minority. The overwhelming absolute majority of the population consists of invisible, low-born nobodies exactly like myself. But one should never make the fatal mistake of underestimating the little guys. We are the actual lifeblood and the hidden machinery that keeps this hyper-prosperous capital city of Chang'an running every single day. My grueling years spent grinding inside the Song Prime Minister's estate, and the fourth Prince's Palace were absolutely not for nothing. Once the underground network of regular folks is fully activated and synchronized, even a swarm of ants can violently topple a massive towering tree. The Crown Prince Peiyu also found himself tangled up in a minor palace scandal, allegedly violating a lowly maidservant in a drunken stupor. However, when stacked against the Song family's treasonous imperial adultery, his infraction was absolutely nothing more than a drop in the bucket. Consequently, the emperor merely sentenced him to a brief period of solitary house arrest. The strategic intent behind his move clicked in my mind instantly. The commoner faction is currently still punching above its weight class and highly vulnerable. So Crown Prince Peiyu brilliantly flipped their own trap against them, intentionally playing dumb to make the arrogant elite clans completely drop their guard. By doing so, he successfully transitions into the shadows while the aristocracy remains exposed in the light, allowing him to bide his time until the perfect moment to deliver a single facile blow. 3 days later, I traveled to the slums to meet with Peiyu as planned. I calculated that with his massive imperial reach, he had already thoroughly dug up my entire backstory. So I wasted absolutely zero breath offering empty explanations. He intensely demanded that I immediately pack my things and sever ties with the fourth prince's estate, but I flatly shut down his request. I carry the crushing weight of my entire butchered clan's blood debt on my back, and I am already the ultimate chessmaster positioned dead center on this board. There is absolutely no universe where I simply walk away. The precise day your grand political ascension is officially secured will be the exact moment I finally vanish from this capital. I refused to linger a second longer and immediately turned on my heel to leave, leaving him with nothing but the chilling sight of my uncompromising, resolute departure. Back at the royal estate, Pei Chao visibly hesitated opening and closing his mouth, before finally forcing the heavy words out into the open. My formal marriage to the elite lady Song Ziwan is officially locked in for the beginning of winter. On the surface, his face maintained an impeccably calm, completely unbothered facade. Yet his hand concealed beneath his long embroidered silk sleeve was clenched into a fiercely trembling fist, clenching so tightly that his knuckles cracked. My hand grinding the ink stone abruptly faltered for a fraction of a second, before I calmly resumed my steady pace and whispered, "Understood." "Are you truly not the slightest bit angry?" he pressed. "If your highness were to recklessly reject this marriage alliance for my sake, Prime Minister Song and the Empress would absolutely ensure I didn't survive the night. I am fully aware that your highness is doing this to shield me." As I spoke, a wave of intense, profound emotion visibly surged deep within his eyes. Of course, protecting me wasn't his solitary motivation. In this ruthless world, everyone eventually encounters moments where they are entirely stripped of free will. He is the high and mighty fourth prince. He is fundamentally chained to the support of the aristocracy, just as the elite clans are utterly dependent on his royal lineage. If the elite clans demand to permanently lock down their absolute supremacy, He is forced to enter the bloody war for the imperial throne. There is absolutely no alternative option on the table. Therefore, orchestrating a grand marriage alliance with the prominent Song family was always an inevitable milestone. It was merely a question of sooner or later. Neither he nor I, nor even the pristine Song Ziyuan herself possessed the leverage to alter this crushing destiny. Since the outcome is completely unchangeable, then what is the point of wasting energy on a futile struggle? Furthermore, if this wedding didn't go through, how could I ever manipulate Song Ming into pouring his entire political weight, resources, and absolute trust directly onto Pei Zhao's shoulders? How could I make Song Ming completely drop his guard in a state of pure ecstatic triumph? And how else could I flawlessly execute the next lethal phase of my Grand Master plan? On the 5th day of the winter month, the grand wedding between Pei Zhao and Lady Song Ziyuan commenced with unmatched luxury. I systematically micromanaged every moving part of the estate to ensure flawless operations. Yet in the dead of that very nuptial night, a shadowy figure stealthily breached my window, slipping quietly into my private quarters. He stood frozen by my bedside, intently tracing the delicate lines of my face as I slept. "You certainly seem to be sleeping exceptionally soundly." A deeply helpless voice muttered, practically dripping with a sharp, resentful undertone of gritted teeth. "Just how exactly did your highness expect me to react?" "By unleashing a dramatic tantrum and threatening to hang myself from the rafters." I slowly blinked my eyes open, point blank asking if he had consummated the marriage, causing Pei Zhao to instantly snap in pure frustration. He aggressively flicked my forehead, demanding, "How on earth can you utter those scandalous words with such absolute cold indifference? My heart is already entirely occupied by you. So how could I possibly cross that line with anyone else?" As the words left his lips, his face flushed an uncharacteristically deep, vibrant shade of crimson. I let out a soft sigh, replying, "Lady Song is now your legally wedded principal wife. She once risked everything to save my very life, and she is truly an exceptionally rare, noble-hearted young woman, even if she possesses 10,000 impeccable virtues and absolute perfection. The cold reality is that her heart holds absolutely zero romantic feelings for me. In fact, she dreads the thought of sharing my bed far more than I ever could." My heart violently skipped a beat. Could it be that he actually knows something hidden? "Whatever makes you say that, Your Highness, because I harbor a profound adoration for someone, and I know exactly how a person behaves when they are deeply in love." When Lady Song looks into my eyes, there is absolutely never a single shred of affection. I silently let out a massive sigh of relief. He clearly remains completely oblivious to the existence of that youth from the bamboo grove. If my Grand Master plan ultimately succeeds in the future, I will absolutely weaponize the life debt the Crown Prince owes me to ensure Song Ziyuan's absolute safety and protection. Perhaps she and that mysterious youth might still stand a chance. She once saved my miserable life, so I shall grant her a brand new lease on life in return. By doing so, our debts to each other will be perfectly settled. Since she has legally married you now, she is officially your woman. No matter what happens in the future, you absolutely must not mistreat or neglect her." Pei Zhao deeply furrowed his brow, muttering, "Yun-er, can you please stop aggressively pushing me into the arms of other women? Ge? No, I am merely terrified that Your Highness will cross Prime Minister Song for my sake. And then, you keep fiercely advocating for Song Ziyuan Qiu. You risked your entire life to save me, claiming it was for her, and when I begged you to return to the estate, you flatly refused my request. Now that she is officially married into my household, instead of showing even a single spark of jealousy, you are actually worried that I won't treat her well enough. Just what on earth do I actually represent inside your heart? Does she hold more weight, or am I the one who truly matters to you? Your Highness, why are you throwing a childish, petulant tantrum all over again? Tell me you are the one who matters." I casually placated him, but he was clearly throwing major shade and seething with silent rage, becoming completely impossible to reason with. What on earth was I supposed to do? I leaned in and softly planted a gentle kiss directly on his cheek, before whispering into his ear, "The two of you are completely different. She is my absolute savior and lifelong benefactor, but you are the only one I genuinely love." This was the absolute first time I had ever spoken the word love out loud to him, and it left him standing completely frozen in his tracks. His intense fury instantly evaporated into thin air while his entire face and neck flushed a brilliant crimson. I quietly shifted my body toward the inner side of the mattress, clearing a comfortable space right beside me. "Your Highness, why don't you come up and rest for a brief moment before sneaking back?" Pei Zhao's face burned an even deeper, more chaotic shade of scarlet, hesitating for a second before letting out a soft, submissive grunt, and carefully lying down right next to me. I subtly nuzzled deeper into the warmth of his embrace, listening intently to the frantic, rapid thumping of his racing heart, before lightly patting his chest and whispering, "Rest now." My absolute most cherished highness. He was a man completely obsessed with absolute propriety and formal boundaries. Consequently, even when his deepest desires were clearly triggered, he would absolutely never rashly cross the line to satisfy his physical lust. Such an unyielding, unbreakable level of self-control was honestly incredibly frustrating, as his sheer restraint was single-handedly causing a major roadblock in my master plan. He gently reached down to stroke my hair, allowing a soft smile to tug at his lips where he thought I couldn't see. Deep in the quiet haze of my slumber, I faintly felt a tender, lingering kiss press against my forehead, accompanied by a softly whispered confession, "I love you too." With that, he quietly pulled away from the bed, carefully slipping right back out through the open window, and even took the extra care to gently latch the frame shut behind him. I immediately opened my eyes, staring blankly at the glass in a deep, analytical thought. Since he values proper courtship and traditional milestones so intensely, then I shall simply orchestrate the perfect ultimate milestone to trap him. To my utter shock, Peijao actually recruited the brilliant youth from the Bamboo Grove Su Jinian to officially take up the prestigious post of the estate's resident Grand Scholar. The sudden development completely threw me off guard, leaving me utterly baffled as to what his true underlying motives were. Could he perhaps be plotting a tactical move to secretly target Song Ziwan? On the cold, festive night of the winter solstice, Song Ziwan masterfully played the zither, while Su Jinian skillfully brought the scene to life on canvas, leaving me sitting quietly in the corner, meticulously wrapping traditional dumplings. Peijao casually pulled up a seat next to me, clumsily trying to learn the folding technique. And eventually, the four of us gathered tightly around the blazing hearth to feast on the fresh dumplings together. For the first time in forever, I caught a glimpse of genuine, unadulterated joy shining in Song Ziwan's eyes, a radiant expression that had been entirely absent from her face for a very long time. Though she was officially the supreme matriarch of this royal estate, she was vastly more liberated here than she had ever been under the oppressive roof of the Prime Minister's mansion. Peijao ensured she was treated with absolute impeccable respect and gave her total personal freedom. He would even masterfully put on a flawless public show in front of servants and high society alike, perfectly playing the part of a fiercely protective, doting husband. Song Ziwan was profoundly grateful for his kindness, yet a deep underlying melancholy still consumed her soul. She tightly grasped my hands, her voice laced with profound sorrow as she whispered, "Xiaojin, do you truly comprehend within this endless, sprawling sea of humanity just how incredibly rare it is to cross paths with an absolute soulmate? As for me, my window of opportunity has already been permanently slammed shut as in Yao, but there is still a beautiful fighting chance for the two of you. You absolutely must not let my tragic situation cause you to throw away your own fated love." In that exact moment, a wave of dark relief washed over my cold heart. Thankfully, Song Ziwan placed such an absolute consuming value on the illusion of true love, meaning when the catastrophic day arrives that the corrupt Song clan is thoroughly obliterated. At the very least, that Su Jinian could become the one thing keeping him going. In a way, Song Ziwan was just like Peijao. They were born as bargaining chips. Their parents craved power far more than they ever loved them. Maybe that was exactly why they chased love so desperately. At this very moment, his gaze toward Su Jinian shimmered with dazzling light. He was only 16. The exact age where dreams of love burned the brightest. Su Jinian walked over to my side and whispered that someone wanted me to hear this. "May fortune stay by your side forever." My heart suddenly skipped a beat. He was actually one of the Crown Prince's people. After finishing the dumplings, Peijao left the two of them behind and dragged me away to watch the stars from the tower. If not, wouldn't that feel way too deliberate? Could he be intentionally letting this happen, just to stage some dramatic cheating scandal? No, I asked him why he let Su Jinian join us for the winter solstice celebration. He said there were times when I kept staring at Song Ziwan, and the way you looked at him was overflowing with guilt and pity. Long ago, I already knew Song Ziwan liked him. Back then, I never cared about things like that. Our relationship was nothing more than mutual gain. I only cared about whether I could achieve my goals. But after meeting you, I finally realized, if a person never meets their true soulmate, or meets them yet still can't stay by their side, it's a kind of loneliness and darkness beyond words. Since you care about him this much, and even specifically told me not to mistreat him, then what harm is there in letting him be happy? That way when you're with me, maybe you won't feel so guilty anymore. So it was because of me all along. Turns out I had completely misunderstood him. Suddenly, the roar of fireworks echoed out. Brilliant fireworks exploded across the sky in breathtaking colors. Peijao turned his head and gazed into the distance. Light and shadows flickered endlessly. Starlight sparkled within the young man's eyes. Where did these fireworks even come from? I intentionally went out of my way to orchestrate this specific display for your highness. Is it breathtaking to behold? I quietly inquired as he nodded in awe before asking why I suddenly wanted to watch the fireworks. I faintly heard my own voice echoing, "Your highness. Let us get married right now." He was left completely paralyzed, standing frozen in his tracks. My burning gaze locked directly onto him as I continued. Let us completely discard all the tedious bureaucratic etiquette and exhausting traditions, and let us entirely exclude all those completely irrelevant outsiders. We shall celebrate our union right here, with these explosive fireworks serving as our celestial witness, and the glowing moon above validating our bonds. So tell me, let us be wed, shall we? A wave of profound emotion flooded his eyes, and after a long silence, he tightly grabbed my hand and whispered, "Come with me." He urgently guided me straight into a secure hidden storehouse chamber, where my eyes immediately fell upon a stunning, flawlessly detailed bridal gown. It was only in that exact moment that the reality finally washed over me. Ever since the precise day we safely returned from our perilous island exile, Pedro had been tirelessly pouring resources into customizing this bridal attire for me, and the masterwork had only just reached its absolute completion. I delicately traced the stitched design of pairing mandarin ducks upon the red bridal veil, noticing that it looked fundamentally different from standard royal embroidery. The actual stitching technique wasn't necessarily sloppy or unrefined, but when juxtaposed directly against the otherworldly divine craftsmanship of the gown itself, it visibly paled in comparison and looked completely out of place. Pei Zhao let out a sudden nervous cough, looking incredibly embarrassed and self-conscious as he murmured, "I was the one who personally embroidered that veil." The sudden revelation left me completely paralyzed with pure, unadulterated astonishment. "I once caught wind of an ancient folklore legend," he explained softly, stating that if a young bride's traditional wedding veil is painstakingly crafted by her groom with absolute unconditional devotion, the union will be granted the supreme blessing of the god of marriage. The deeper his devotion, the more absolute their eternal bliss. Do you truly buy into those myths? And besides, why didn't you simply instruct me to embroider it instead? Ikea. Because your devotion could never match the absolute intensity of mine. He abruptly shifted his focus, asking me point blank, "Just what on earth are you concealing in your hand?" I frantically hid my hands, completely behind my back to obscure the object. Without a word, his powerful arms wrapped tightly around my frame in a warm embrace, deftly retrieving a small handmade scented sachet from my grip, the amateur craftsmanship of which was arguably worse than his own veil. He gasped in pure delight, "You actually hand-stitched this special piece for me." Now it was entirely my turn to be consumed by an overwhelming wave of embarrassment. If you honestly find it too hideous to look at, then just hand it back. It is absolutely not hideous. This is without a doubt the most beautiful, precious, scented amulet I've ever laid eyes on. We immediately changed into our respective pristine wedding robes, dropping to our knees side by side beneath the glowing night sky. With the silver moon serving as our eternal divine witness, I, Yunjin, officially take Pei Zhao to be my lawfully wedded husband, to share this life together bound by destiny, and permanently locking our hearts as one. With the silver moon serving as our eternal divine witness, I, Pei Zhao, officially take Yunjin to be my lawfully wedded wife. No matter how fiercely the storms may rage, no matter how treacherous or broken the path ahead becomes, and no matter the ultimate boundary of life or death, we shall walk hand in hand through it all, never abandoning each other's side, through every single lifetime and reincarnation, forever unified in body and soul. He even added his own passionate, unscripted vows, before we bowed to the high heavens and then finally turned to bow deeply to each other. The cascading water-like moonlight bathed the velvet marriage bed in a pristine glow, as the heavy crimson veil obscuring my vision was gently lifted away, bringing me eye to eye with a gaze radiating absolute profound tenderness. My eyes flickered with a seductive, teasing shimmer, as I intensely drank in the strikingly handsome features of the young prince before me. "Your Highness, a single fleeting moment of a wedding night is worth 1,000 bars of pure gold," I whispered softly, gradually leaning my body into his personal space. "Wait, hold on a second. We haven't lit the traditional crimson wedding candles yet." I let out a silent, agonizing mental scream at his absolutely cursed, unyielding obsession with proper etiquette. I forced down my irritation as he glided gracefully toward the candle stands, carefully igniting several vibrant red ceremonial tapers. "Are we finally ready now, Your Highness?" Just a brief moment longer, so... He then reached for a wicker basket overflowing with pristine dried peach blossom petals, strolling back over to the mattress and gently gesturing for me to stand up. It turned out he was dead set on perfectly scattering the petals all over the sheets. Admittedly, it was kind of incredibly romantic. I swallowed my impatience once more, summoning an extraordinary amount of patience to wait out his decorating phase. "Can we proceed now?" I pressed him, my voice dripping with anticipation. "Almost there, just one more thing," he muttered softly. He drifted gracefully over to the mahogany vanity table, meticulously selecting a specific premium incense blend before setting it ablaze. and then immediately moved over to a silver basin to thoroughly wash his hands. If this man keeps dragging out these endless delays, the bloody sun is going to rise. Your Highness, please get your asset over here right this second. He completely dried his hands and obediently walked over to the bedside. I instantly hooked my finger beneath his chin, tilting his face upward. The flickering red candles cast a mesmerizing, seductive glow. The intoxicating aroma of the premium incense heavily saturated the air, and the scattered peach blossoms added a striking touch of vibrant color. My dearest husband is truly such a devastatingly handsome specimen. I watched his prominent Adam's apple violently bob up and down, his ears flushing a spectacular burning shade of deep crimson, while his breathing grew noticeably heavier and erratic. Wait, what on earth are you? Before he could finish his sentence, I aggressively shoved him backward onto the mattress, firmly pinning both of his wrists against the sheets and leaned down to plant my lips heavily onto his, giving him absolutely zero opportunity to utter a single word or mount a resistance. As our lips dynamically clashed together, our scorching hot breaths intertwined in a deep, consuming wave of passion. He finally abandoned all his rigid hesitation, yielding entirely to the moment and responding to me fiercely, wrapping his powerful arms around my waist to pull me incredibly close. With our chests locked tightly together, our hearts hammered against one another at a violent, erratic pace, screaming an unspoken torrent of endless affection and untamed desire. We kept going until our lungs were completely starved for oxygen, leaving us breathlessly panting, to which I teased, "Is this already too much for you to handle?" Peijiao's lips subtly curled upward into a deeply wicked, confident smirk, his velvety, low voice matching the hazy, intoxicating allure of his heavy gaze, making him look exactly like a seductive incubus hell-bent on stealing a soul. He firmly wrapped his hands around my waist, swiftly rolling us over across the bedsheets, completely flipping the power dynamic to take absolute control of the night. In that exact fleeting moment of ecstasy, I genuinely found myself completely unable to distinguish if I was merely putting on a flawless performance, or if I had accidentally allowed something far deeper to bleed into the act. A raw, uncharted emotional attachment that even I myself couldn't fully comprehend. Shortly after, Peijiao meticulously selected an exceptionally auspicious day on the calendar to officially elevate my rank and welcome me into his household as his favored side consort. One morning, Su Jinian secretly approached me, stating that a mysterious individual was desperate to meet me. He even explicitly warned that if I coldly rejected the meeting, that person would boldly breach the security of the fourth prince's estate just to track me down. Having no choice, I traveled back to the familiar, dilapidated slums. The torrential downpour that day was absolutely relentless, and the elite youth stood entirely drenched beneath the rain, his solitary silhouette looking profoundly broken and fragile against the elements. I raised a paper umbrella over my head, and the very microsecond I stepped down from the royal carriage, before I could even firmly plant my feet onto the muddy ground, Crown Prince Pei Yu aggressively bolted toward me in a frantic stride, viciously pulling my body into a tight, non-negotiable embrace. "Yuner, I beg of you, do not return to that snake pit ever again. I will personally arrange every single detail to ensure your freedom. I am currently pregnant, and the child belongs to him." My voice remained chillingly level and composed, barren of a single shred of hesitation or raw emotion. "You can immediately weaponize this news to spread toxic rumors throughout the capital, such as claiming Pei Jiao is utterly obsessed with a concubine while humiliating his legal wife, even allowing a low-born mistress to carry his firstborn son ahead of the proper lineage. Prime Minister Song will absolutely lose his mind with rage upon hearing this. He will undoubtedly launch a covert strike to assassinate the unborn child inside my womb. When that inevitable tragedy strikes the Prime Minister's estate, and the fourth prince will permanently fracture. During the chaotic fallout of their absolute political divorce, the loyalty of the other elite noble clans will fundamentally waver and shatter. That will be your golden opportunity to swoop in, consolidate power, and win over the masses, while you quietly bide your time for the perfect moment to strike." Pei Yu slowly loosened his grip around my shoulders, staring down at me with an expression of pure horrified disbelief. "Yuner, I absolutely do not need you to sacrifice yourself like this. If my imperial throne must be paid for by destroying the woman I love, then I would honestly rather not have it at all. Pei Yu, have you ever personally witnessed your parents and your entire clan brutally slaughtered right before your eyes? Have you ever survived the sheer horror of being trafficked like livestock, sold time after time, and beaten within an inch of your life? Have you ever been used as a living guinea pig for toxic poison trials, enduring an agonizing torment that makes death look like a luxury? Have you ever truly known the raw despair of starving while freezing to death? Do you have even the slightest inkling of how I managed to stubbornly drag myself alive through all these horrific years? If these corrupt aristocratic clans are not permanently eradicated, then across this empire there will only be an endless influx of tragic souls, forced to suffer the exact same miserable fate as me. you are the crown prince of this realm. You are the absolute ultimate beacon of hope for every commoner. You are the only salvation capable of avenging my slaughtered clan and redeeming the poor. And now you have the absolute audacity to tell me you don't want the throne. If you walk away, what happens to the martyrs who have already laid down their lives? What happens to the loyal followers who have staked their entire lives and families on you? What happens to them, and what on earth happens to me? From the moment you were born a prince, you were fundamentally forbidden from drowning in petty romantic sentimentality. Otherwise, every single blood-soaked sacrifice we've made will be completely flushed down the drain. When that failure comes, every single scholar backing you along with my own miserable self will be ruthlessly hunted down and executed, and the countless innocent citizens of this empire will be permanently doomed to grovel under the crushing tyranny of the elite clans. Since you are our absolute savior, you must ruthlessly exploit this political facade and weaponize its impact to its absolute lethal limits. The glorious day the noble families are utterly destroyed is the only day I will ever taste true liberation, and the only day the common people will finally rise. As for the innocent girl Jin Yun, you should simply consider her to have perished back in that horrific blood-soaked tragedy of our childhood. It honestly feels incredibly surreal. This jade bangle that I could never seem to force off my wrist in the past effortlessly slipped off my hand today without a single bit of resistance. I coldly pressed the heirloom back into his trembling palm. Humans are not unfeeling blocks of stone or wood, who could truly remain completely numb to affection. But he is the crown prince carrying the heavy expectations and hopes of millions, which fundamentally dictates that he cannot afford the luxury of personal romance at such a critical historical turning point. This icy rain is exactly what he needs to violently snap him back to reality. I coldly turned my back on him and stepped back up into the carriage. Just as the carriage was about to pull away, Peiyu unexpectedly forced his way inside, brutally grabbing my wrist with an intense grip, and forcefully sliding the heavy jade bangle right back onto my hand. "Just you wait until I finish what I have to say," he growled, before turning on his heel and bolting right back into the stormy night. Now a glorious development like my sudden pregnancy was a juicy piece of gossip that Prime Minister Songming absolutely needed to be the first to find out. And running the calculated timeline in my head, it was almost time for me to officially drop dead. That very afternoon, Songming paid a strategic visit to the 4th Prince's estate. I made sure my complexion looked glowing and vibrant, casually laughing and gossiping with the female scribe in the corridor, intentionally letting my guard down at the perfect moment to accidentally leak the massive secret of my pregnancy within his earshot. Songming's reaction was an absolute priceless masterpiece, that usually haughty refined mask of a scholarly statesman completely fractured and shattered. He honestly thought he was the ultimate puppet master manipulating the entire board, never expecting that a dying pawn like me would not only climb the ranks to steal his daughter's spotlight, but would even successfully conceive a child way ahead of Song Ziwan. I was on track to give birth to Pei Chao's highly coveted firstborn son, and considering just how fiercely and deeply Pei Chao cherished my existence, the moment he successfully ascends the imperial throne in the near future, there was a massive threat he might pass the crown straight to this firstborn bastard. Having already invested so much blood and capital to reach this exact stage, it was fundamentally impossible for the Prime Minister to ditch Pei Chao and back a different prince. He had officially passed the point of no return with absolutely no escape route left. Yet all the painstaking years he spent building this political empire were now on the verge of becoming nothing more than a free luxurious gift handed directly to an outsider. His gaze locked onto me, freezing into a chilling venomous stare like a deadly viper. But for the first time in my life, I stared him right in the face without flinching, flashing a deeply provocative mocking smirk right back at him, before turning around to treat him to a completely relaxed, carefree view of my back. He wields absolute crushing dictatorial power over the entire imperial court, so naturally, he assumed that snuffing out my miserable little life would be just as effortless as crushing a pathetic, insignificant ant beneath his boot. But he was about to get a brutal, agonizing reality check on what true helplessness feels like. The puppet prince he single-handedly raised from the dirt, Pei Chao, was turning out to be infinitely more unyielding and dangerous than he ever anticipated. He couldn't risk starting an open, chaotic war against Pei Chao directly, and the very microsecond he tried to resort to his usual underhanded, sinister parlor tricks, he would immediately realize that every single spy he planted inside the prince's estate had already been ruthlessly hunted down and executed. The entire estate grounds were now under an airtight, impenetrable lockdown, and my private courtyard was packed with a massive reinforcement of elite guards, standing watch around the clock to protect me. Every single detail of my daily meals and routine was heavily scrutinized by dedicated specialists. And to make matters worse for him, even his own meticulously groomed daughter was constantly acting as my personal shield, vetting everything to keep me safe. He might be an all-powerful god out there pulling the strings of the empire. But inside the impenetrable fortress of this royal estate, he didn't have a single solitary window of opportunity to strike me down. That identical afternoon, Song Ziyuan paid a high-stakes visit back to the Prime Minister's grand estate. And the moment she returned, her eyes were severely swollen and bloodshot from crying, with a violent burning crimson handprint explicitly stamped across her cheek. I knew instantly that her monstrous father had utterly broken her spirit, simultaneously, under the Crown Prince's brilliant covert manipulation behind the scenes. The entire capital was aggressively buzzing with scandalous rumors that Pei Zhao was shamelessly doting on a lowborn mistress while destroying his noble wife. Just visualizing the absolute chaotic migraine exploding inside Song Ming's arrogant skull made me so ecstatic that I happily devoured 2 extra bowls of rice. Pei Zhao and Song Ziyuan silently absorbed the brutal public backlash and toxic media slander. Yet they deliberately refused to let even a shred of that negativity leak into their interactions with me. They were utterly terrified that the stress might negatively impact my health. Shortly after, a massive endless river of luxurious medicinal supplements from the Prime Minister's estate began flowing into our gates. Oh please, is this basic amateur sabotage really the best move he can pull? Song Ziyuan meticulously forced the imperial doctors to run extensive toxicity screenings on every single item, before she even felt safe enough to clear them for delivery to my courtyard. Pei Zhao was still fundamentally unsatisfied, ordering his own elite private physicians to run a secondary thorough inspection before granting final approval. As for me, I had absolutely zero reservations. I happily gorged myself on whatever they served without a single care in the world. This broken body of mine, which had been systematically poisoned and used for human drug trials in the past, was biologically incapable of ever carrying a child to term. Even if against all biological odds a baby was born, it was completely doomed to a painfully short lifespan. The bloodline of the Jin family was permanently fated to end with my generation, meaning this entire illusion of a pregnancy was simply a lethal trap custom made to bury Song Ming. When the following spring finally arrived, Zhang Kuai urgently tracked me down with a desperate request. He desperately needed to infiltrate the high-security imperial dungeon to visit the second young master of the Xiang clan. It was only in that exact conversation that the shocking truth finally clicked during the long stretch of time, when he completely vanished without a trace. He had actually been risking his life smuggling vital military provisions directly to the frontline troops. The formidable second young master Xiang Chuan had enlisted in the imperial army at the tender age of 8, fighting side by side with his legendary father to guard the treacherous northern borders, guaranteeing the absolute peace of the great Xia Empire while their elite warriors gladly bled out on the battlefield for their country. Yet the corrupt aristocratic elite led by Song Ming actively sabotaged and intercepted their vital lifelines, by viciously plotting to starve them into absolute annihilation out in the frozen wasteland. Driven by an unyielding desire to repay his profound debt to the Xiang family, Zhang Kui had gambled his entire life to transport those illicit supplies straight to the northern front. He had even gone as far as using his own body as a live test subject for experimental antidotes to successfully break the lethal plague ravaging the northern army. Against all odds, the heroic Xiang father and son managed to return home in glorious triumph, only to be instantly framed by the corrupt nobles on a completely fabricated charge of high treason. The brilliant second young master was officially sentenced to a brutal public execution after the autumn harvest. The horrific systematic destruction of my own Jin clan was actively repeating itself right before my eyes. I aggressively seized Pei Zhao's exclusive Imperial Command token, covertly engineering a strict single incense stick window of visitation time for Xiang Kui. A high-stakes operation of this magnitude was fundamentally impossible to keep hidden from Pei Zhao, and it was equally guaranteed to instantly flash on Song Ming's radar. But honestly, what did I care? Pei Zhao trusts me implicitly. The moment he uncovers the horrific truth about me being weaponized as a living poison vessel, his heart will completely break for me, and he will only blame himself, wondering why I didn't confide in him sooner. When autumn arrived, my heavily swollen stomach led to a catastrophic, agonizingly obstructed labor. Both the elite imperial physicians and the veteran midwives were completely out of options. Pei Zhao's eyes turned entirely bloodshot with sheer desperate panic. I tightly clutched his trembling hand and whispered, "Your Highness, please do not be terrified. Immediately send an urgent envoy into the capital to fetch Xiang Kui. He is the only soul alive who can pull me back from death's door." In the entire history of the great Xia Empire, Zhang Kuai was the absolute pioneer to follow in the footsteps of the legendary divine physician Hua Tuo, mastering the perilous forbidden art of a surgical cesarean section. The moment Xiang Kui burst through the doors, a completely localized, unhinged Pei Zhao actually weaponized a death threat against him, stating that if I failed to survive this procedure, he would ensure the physician accompanied me to the grave. I shot him a sharp, furious glare, forcing him to immediately shut his mouth in immense guilt. Zhang Kuai grimly demanded to know whether to prioritize saving the mother or the child. dropping the massive bombshell that I was actually carrying twins. Without a single microsecond of hesitation, Pei Zhao locked in his choice to save me at all costs. Zhang Kuei declared that a natural birth was fundamentally off the table, leaving a surgical incision into the womb as the only remaining option, explicitly warning that it would be a horrific blood-soaked sight, and begging him to vacate the room. But he completely ignored the warning, gripping my hand with an iron vice, staring with wide, terrified eyes as Zhang Kuei carefully sliced open my abdomen to successfully retrieve the infant from my flesh. That raw, traumatic spectacle left a permanent, unshakable psychological scar on his mind. He actually ended up secretly wiping away tears of sheer terror, fiercely swearing an oath that he would never let me endure the horror of childbirth ever again. Are the children us breathing? I forced out the question, already knowing the tragic reality, not even daring to cast a single glance toward the swaddling clothes. Praying for your children to grow up healthy and strong is the absolute instinctive desire of every single mother on this planet. But these poor souls were deeply unfortunate to have ever chosen my toxic womb as their vessel. I could only pray that in their next reincarnation, they would never cross paths with a broken, cursed mother like me. You have been blessed with a perfectly healthy boy and girl, Zhang Kuei announced softly, leaving me completely paralyzed and stunned. Pei Zhao and Song Jiwan were each cradling a newborn infant, crowding tightly around my bedside in a wave of overwhelming, radiating warmth. In that fleeting, surreal moment, I genuinely couldn't decipher the chaotic torrent of emotions exploding in my heart. Did my father and mother look just as profoundly happy when they brought me into this world, just before slipping away into the shadows? Zhang Kuei left behind a specific, carefully engineered phrase. The side consort suffered a catastrophic, life-threatening, obstructed labor, and I am deeply terrified she may have been fed some lethal, untraceable toxin. Moving forward, she will require absolute, meticulous medical supervision around the clock. Pei Zhao's sharp instincts immediately picked up on the sinister undertone of those words. He violently snatched the sleeping infant straight out of Song Ziwan's trembling arms, locking his eyes onto Song Ziwan with a chilling, murderous glare. Your Highness, please do not blame Sister Song. She is merely an innocent, noble lady who has lived a sheltered life inside the inner chambers. It is physically impossible for her to comprehend such demonic, undercover assassination plots. I gasped out, my voice sounding incredibly frail and exhausted, making my strategic implication crystal clear to everyone in the room. It was the tyrannical prime minister and his wife who had ruthlessly manipulated Song Ziwan as a blind weapon to successfully orchestrate my gruesome death. At the very least, my endless gluttony over those laced supplements during the past few months hadn't gone to waste. To think that my own naive actions almost completely destroyed you and the precious babies. Song Jiwan choked out her face, utterly pale and overwhelmed with suffocating guilt. This is absolutely not your fault. Sister Song, Your Highness, please listen to me. The sole reason Sister Song, myself, and these two precious newborns managed to survive this horrific night is entirely due to Zhang Kui's miraculous medical intervention. When the absolute perfect political window presents itself in the near future, could you please petition the Emperor to grant the imprisoned second young master a chance to redeem his alleged crimes through military service? I merely wish to secure this massive karmic blessing to protect our children's future. The very second the morning sun finally broke across the horizon, Pei Zhao and Song Jiwan each held a newborn infant tightly against their chests and officially marched into the imperial palace. I later learned that the Empress Dowager was absolutely ecstatic, and even the reigning emperor, who had historically viewed Pei Zhao with deep-seated disdain and dissatisfaction, uncharacteristically treated him with a warm, profoundly pleasant countenance, even going as far as personally bestowing auspicious imperial names upon the twins. While Pei Zhao maintained a perfectly stoic, unreadable facade on the outside, his heart was secretly soaring with an overwhelming wave of pure euphoria. In the past, no matter how hard he bled or how many impossible feats he achieved, he could never seem to catch a single favorable glance from his cold, demanding imperial father. But today, the sovereign ruler had personally named his flesh and blood, leaving him entirely drunk on validation. Meanwhile, inside the inner palace, the Empress and the Prime Minister were absolutely foaming at the mouth with unbridled rage, with the newly favored Pei Zhao and his influential wife fiercely pleading on behalf of the Xiang clan, reinforced by a coordinated barrage of official petitions launched by the Crown Prince's faction in open court. Song Ming was completely backed into a corner with zero political leverage to resist. The second young master's death sentence was officially commuted, sending him to the borderlands to clear his name through battlefield glory. At this point, what choice did Song Ming even have? He could curse and scream at Pei Zhao behind closed doors, but at the end of the day, he still had to aggressively back him for the throne. As for my twin bastards, he rationalized that he could easily execute them whenever he pleased further down the line. After all, throughout the bloody history of the imperial dynasties, the sudden death of a few frail princes was an incredibly common, everyday occurrence, meaning he wasn't stressed about them in the slightest. He even fantasized that the moment he successfully overthrew the entire royal lineage in the future, He would simply strip away the imperial family name and force the entire empire to bear the surname Song, a grand ambition that was well within his reach. Except he was never going to get that opportunity. Peijo's sudden calculated betrayal this time around ultimately completely alienated a massive number of noble aristocratic clans. The absolute unwavering devotion he publicly showered upon a mere side consort and her bastard firstborn caused the rock-solid loyalty of these elite families to severely fracture and waver. Over the course of the following year, several powerful noble houses secretly jumped ship and began alignment with the Crown Prince. On the surface, the Crown Prince's faction intentionally maintained a weak, submissive facade. They masterfully put Song Ming on a massive pedestal, inflating his ego to the heavens, allowing him to become thoroughly intoxicated with his own power, and completely reckless in his blind arrogance. Then, on the absolute eve of another mid-autumn festival, the reigning emperor suddenly fell into critical condition, prompting the elite noble clans led by Song Ming to instantly execute a violent military coup. Peijiao directly spearheaded the storming of the imperial palace. But right before marching, he handed both me and Song Ziwan our official papers of divorce, secretly tasking Su Jinian to smuggle us out of the capital while delivering a final message. If I successfully claim the throne, I will personally come to bring you back home. And what if you fail this bloody gamble? I challenged. Then you are officially a free woman, he smiled softly. The sky is vast and the ocean is endless. For the entire remainder of your days, take our precious children and go witness the beautiful world on my behalf. Are you not even a little terrified that I might follow you into death? No, you won't. Song Ming genuinely believed he had the entire board completely locked down, completely oblivious to the fact that the second young master, Xiang Chuan, had already positioned tens of thousands of battle-hardened elite troops in a silent ambush just outside the city walls, waiting exactly for the corrupt nobles to launch their treasonous assault, so he could ruthlessly slaughter every single one of them under the glorious banner of crushing a coup, in the span of a single blood-soaked night. The entire empire underwent a massive regime change, and the Crown Prince successfully ascended the imperial throne. Who on earth orchestrated all of this? Song Ming was violently bound and chained inside the absolute darkness of the imperial dungeon, his trademark sophisticated scholarly elegance completely shattered into nothingness, leaving him looking like a pathetic, thoroughly beaten dog. His once pristine scholar robes were heavily soaked through with dark, sticky bloodstains, a piercing, blinding shade of crimson that mirrored the horrific rivers of blood spilled across the Jin family estate all those years ago. His toxic gaze rapidly shifted from freezing cold to unbridled rage and finally to venomous malice. Who is the ultimate mastermind? He roared at me. I casually used a pristine, snow-white silk handkerchief to wipe down the razor-sharp edge of my dagger, letting out a deeply chilling mocking chuckle. I am exactly that pathetic, overconfident nobody you always looked down upon. The insignificant, low-born trash you claim could never hope to shake a century-old noble clan. That's impossible, you. Have you finally pieced the puzzle together? Why on earth would it be impossible? Your precious golden boy son was single-handedly slaughtered by my own two hands. He never actually contracted that disgusting fatal venereal disease. It was an engineered toxin. To be entirely precise, at the exact moment you buried him, he was merely trapped in a state of artificial vegetative death, only to be buried alive by your own hands. I'll fucking slaughter you, he roared. I burst into hysterical laughter, plunging the blade deep into his flesh yet again. Blistering hot blood sprayed violently across my face, making me look like a demonic entity crawling straight out of the deepest pits of hell. A literal soul-reaping Asura demon. I was infinitely more terrifying and spine-chilling than he ever was in his prime. I systematically tortured him using the most brutal, sadistic Iron Maidens and tools available. Ironically, some of these exact devices were horrific inventions he created himself. At the absolute beginning, he tried to maintain a shred of his arrogant, high and mighty pride, but that quickly dissolved into pure, unadulterated terror. Eventually, he was reduced to groveling on the floor, weeping and begging for mercy. Grant you mercy. I couldn't restrain the mocking laughter bubbling up from my chest. When the desperate commoners bared their souls begging for your pity, did you ever grant them even a single shred of mercy? When my heavily pregnant mother knelt in the dirt crying for her life, did your sadistic heart ever show her mercy? Those helpless peasants who prostrated themselves at your feet, screaming for you to spare their innocent lives, did you ever show them a single ounce of mercy? No, you didn't, you absolute hypocritical monster. You played the saint, utterly loathing the poor and looking down on the lower classes, treating every single civilian like absolute garbage. You monopolized absolute dictatorial control over the imperial court, gorging yourself on the blood, sweat, and taxes of the common people, while ruthlessly utilizing any sinister, underhanded method to secure your power. You treated human lives like cheap, disposable weeds. Therefore, you and your disgusting cannibalistic clan who fed on the literal flesh of the poor rightfully deserve to be butchered by the exact same lowborn trash and pathetic ants you so deeply despised. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to give you the easy escape of death just yet. I'm going to hack off your arms and legs, turning your pathetic torso into a living human pig in a jar, and you will be forced to endure the exact same nightmare I survived, watching every single member of your elite family get brutally decapitated one by one. His eyes dilated into windows of pure paralyzed horror. With a single fluid motion, I brought the blade down, severing his limbs from his body in a horrific flash, before commanding the Imperial physicians to immediately stabilize his wounds. They were strictly ordered to ensure he survives to a ripe old age, condemned to feast on endless unimaginable agony for the rest of his days. Later, Peiyu granted me the exclusive privilege to personally execute the fallen prince Pei Chao. His prison cell was customized with relatively luxurious premium accommodations. It featured a clean window, a polished desk with absolutely zero filth or stench. This was a final special courtesy I had personally requested on his behalf. He was a hardcore neat freak after all. Even back during our harsh survival days on that deserted island, he fiercely maintained an immaculate, spotless standards. Yet right now, he sat completely shattered and isolated in the darkest corner of the room. His clothes were visibly disheveled and in slight disarray, and the stray messy bangs across his forehead hadn't even been properly styled back. He was quietly clutching the handmade sachet I once gifted him, staring deeply into it in a complete daze. Peiyu had already ruthlessly broken the truth about my real dark identity to him. Yet the exact microsecond his eyes locked onto me as I entered, he didn't display a single trace of explosive fury or emotional betrayal. His gaze remained incredibly soft and tender. He silently watched me approach his cell, watching as I carefully laid out a spread of side dishes upon the wooden table, watching as I gripped the cold porcelain wine jug, and meticulously poured a cup of wine for him, followed by one for myself. His eyes were permanently glued to me. Yet for some bizarre, unexplainable reason, I found myself entirely unable to look him in the eyes. But just as I reached down to raise my wine cup to my lips, his hand abruptly shot forward, blocking and sealing the opening of the cup. He knew with absolute certainty that this was the executioner's wine meant to send him to his grave. I let out a weak, self-deprecating chuckle, saying, "My body has been completely forged as a living poison vessel. I am entirely immune to every lethal toxin on this earth. Even so, drinking this stuff will only wreck your health," he whispered softly, his voice devoid of any malice. "This is officially the final time," I muttered under my breath, gently prying his fingers away before draining the entire cup in a single desperate gulp. I immediately tipped the jug to pour myself another overflowing cup. If your heart holds any burning questions, ask them now. He just silently watched me down cup after consecutive cup of the toxic liquor, until he finally broke his agonizing silence. "I have officially entrusted our twins to Sister Song and Sujinian. Oh, by the way, Sujinian was actually an undercover operative working for Peiyu all along." "I see," he murmured, followed by another heavy, suffocating silence. I tipped the vessel to pour out the absolute final drops of wine. The jug was now completely hollow and empty. He quietly asked me if I had ever felt a single shred of genuine love for him. I swallowed that final burning gulp of wine, finally raising my eyes to look directly into his face. And leaning straight into his tender, unwavering gaze, I slowly pulled his body toward mine, pressing my lips firmly against his cold mouth as I forced the lethal poison wine straight from my throat into his. "I deeply pray that in your next reincarnation you are blessed with doting parents who cherish you, loyal siblings who stand by your side in perfect harmony, a devoted woman who loves you with her entire soul and being, and a house bursting at the seams with children and grandchildren." I am utterly powerless to describe the expression in his eyes during his final seconds. Why on earth was there not a single solitary molecule of hatred in his gaze? Why did his eyes still overflow with that exact same deep, boundless ocean of tenderness? He was supposed to absolute detest and curse my very existence. I watched his body helplessly collapse right before my eyes, and the dam broke, reducing me to a sobbing, hysterical mess. I still owed him a final lifetime's worth of an apology. Right before I went to see him, the former imperial noble consort, who had now ascended as the reigning empress dowager, confided in me, saying, "Zhao Er was fundamentally a gentle, good-natured child at his very core." I distinctly remember watching him during his early childhood years, desperately trying with all his little heart to nurse a tiny fledgling that had fallen from its nest, only to end up being brutally, relentlessly scolded by his tyrannical mother for hours. They even went as far as violently crushing the poor bird to death right before his very eyes. An innocent child's tender heart is systematically frozen into solid ice by that exact kind of daily calculated cruelty. His imperial father didn't actually start out treating him with such freezing neglect. It was only after the catastrophic, bloody annihilation of the Jin family, when the emperor grew deeply paranoid of the noble clans and the empress, Okisa, that his explosive royal wrath unceremoniously targeted innocent Pei Zhao as well. In the beginning, the poor boy desperately tried everything to please his father, only to be aggressively pushed away and cast aside over and over again, until he eventually surrendered to his tragic fate, sealing himself in absolute numb apathy. Later on, Xiang Kui tracked me down, gravely questioning why on earth I refused to keep my own flesh and blood by my side. "You know the truth better than anyone," I replied bluntly. My entire body was systematically weaponized as a toxic vessel. My remaining days are severely numbered. It is far better if those precious children grow up with absolutely zero memory of my existence. "I will purge the toxins and save your life," he countered fiercely. "Don't waste your breath. My constitution is completely ruined. And besides, I absolutely despise bitter things. I have zero interest in choking down disgusting medical concoctions for the final fleeting moments of my existence. I simply want to go out and witness the vast skies and endless oceans of this world. Then let's disappear together." I quietly drafted a final farewell letter, pressing my jade bracelet firmly over the parchment to hold it down, before officially turning my back on the imperial capital of Chang'an alongside Xiang Kui. As we traveled, he traveled the land as a wandering physician, collecting rare medical manuscripts, while simultaneously compounding all sorts of sweet, concentrated medicinal pills to force feed me. They were actually incredibly sugary without a single trace of bitterness, even when our footsteps took us to the most isolated remote mountain villages. The air was still continuously filled with the impoverished peasants singing the praises of the new emperor. They cheered for the absolute abolition of various heavy extortionate taxes and hidden tariffs. They celebrated that commoners no longer required the corrupt backing of high-ranking aristocrats to freely sit for the imperial civil service examinations. They rejoiced that independent women were finally legally permitted to establish their own households, while the archaic oppressive chastity arches were violently torn down, and they roared that the volatile northern frontiers had been completely recaptured and secured by General Xiang, ensuring the civilian population would never again bleed under the horrors of war. And most importantly, the legendary Jin clan, along with all the other famed honorable lowborn families, had their names completely gloriously cleared of all treasonous charges. The daily lives of the common people were becoming infinitely brighter and more prosperous. My father and mother haven't manifested in my dreams for a very long time now. With their spirits watching from the heavens, they must finally be resting in absolute peaceful closure. As for my own body, it mysteriously feels a bit more vibrant and refreshed with each passing day. It honestly seems like I might just stick around on this earth for an exceptionally long time. After all, medicine and poison stem from the exact same root. Ironically, I ended up using my lethal toxic expertise to rescue countless innocent souls. 3 full years later, we finally embarked on our long-awaited journey back home. Xiang Kui officially returned to the grand imperial capital of Chang'an, while I drifted toward a breathtakingly picturesque, serene little town blooming with vibrant flowers. Suddenly, the clear, energetic voices of young children reciting their lessons echoed beautifully from a nearby traditional private academy. An unpolished jade can never be crafted into a priceless masterpiece. A human who refuses to learn will never comprehend true righteousness. My eyes slowly drifted up to the hanging wooden plaque above the academy entrance, which read, "The Yunjin Academy." I gasped. It was literally my own name staring back at me, with my face safely concealed behind a delicate silk veil. I only dared to observe everything from a safe, distant hiding spot. Right there, I instantly spotted Song Ziyuan and Su Jinian, standing beautifully beneath a canopy of blooming peach blossom trees. Song Ziyuan radiated joy with a heavily pregnant belly, while Su Jinian gently pressed his ear against her stomach, whispering sweet, soft words to their unborn child. Their eyes were completely overflowing with pure, unadulterated connubial bliss. This is absolutely perfect. She truly deserves this radiant happiness after all her suffering. A few moments later, dozens of vibrant, energetic schoolchildren came bursting out of the academy gates in absolute high spirits, their faces completely lit up with that pure post-school freedom euphoria. I meticulously scanned every single little face walking past, paralyzed by the terrifying fear of missing the one thing I came to see. Until finally, at the very end of the crowd, a strikingly handsome, elegant, and profoundly gentle young gentleman slowly stepped out into the sunlight. His left arm was securely cradling a precious 4 or 5-year-old little girl, while his right hand tenderly held the palm of a charming little boy. The two toddlers looked almost completely identical, boasting the most pinchable, chubby little cheeks that made them look absolutely adorable. In that exact microsecond, I completely lost control, hot tears instantly blurring my vision. Suddenly, a friendly local older woman gently tapped my shoulder, teasing, "Hey, young lady. Have you also fallen completely head over heels for the second young master of the Su family?" "Wait, has someone else caught his eye?" I managed to ask. "Ha ha 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 ha. Oh goodness me, someone else is a massive understatement. Try half the town." The old auntie chuckled with a knowing mischievous glint in her eye, and once her chatterbox tendencies unlocked, there was absolutely no shutting her up. Young Master Su is the absolute definition of a brilliant elite scholar, and he's blessed with such an exceptionally handsome face. The number of eligible young maidens from all the surrounding villages who want him is endless, even though eager matchmakers have completely broken down his front door trying to propose. The man stubbornly refuses to look at a single one of them. Why is that? I asked softly. Because his absolute undying loyalty to his late deceased wife is deep as the ocean. You probably don't know this, do you? This entire private academy is specifically named the Yunjin Academy, utilizing the exact name of his tragically lost beloved wife. He is truly a man possessing an incredibly pure and benevolent soul. There are countless impoverished children in this town completely unable to afford tuition, yet he selflessly takes every single one of them in without a single complaint. He merely requests that these underprivileged students bring basic firewood, rice or local fruits to symbolically cover their educational fees. But honestly, the entire neighborhood knows the absolute truth. Those petty supplies can't even cover a fraction of the children's actual meal costs. Yet he strictly announces to the public that they have paid their tuition in full, ensuring they stand on absolute equal footing with all the other wealthy scholars. 3 years ago, that final cup of wine I forced him to drink was indeed heavily laced with a toxic drug. But it was never an executioner's poison designed to steal his life. Rather, it was a specialized medical concoction engineered to completely wipe his agonizing past away. I deliberately cashed in the immense debt of life the current emperor owed me, leveraged the profound bonds of our childhood sweetheart history together, utilized everything I had sacrificed for the rise of the lower classes during those bloody years, and bartered literally every single shred of political chips I possessed, to successfully beg a royal decree for Pei Zhao and Song Ziyuan, granting them the miraculous opportunity to live openly and honorably beneath the sun. Song Ziyuan and Su Jinyan ultimately crossed the finish line to eternal marital bliss, while the royal prince known as Pei Zhao officially ceased to exist in this world. The man standing there today is named Su Zhao. He is officially the esteemed second young master of the prestigious Su family, the beloved younger brother of Su Jinyan, blessed with adoring parents who fiercely cherish him, harmonious brotherly ties, a supportive sister-in-law to watch over his path, and 2 precious children whose entire world revolves around him. In this peaceful sanctuary, there are 0 toxic palace intrigues, 0 cold, calculating business transactions of power, and 0 boundless, suffocating isolation. There is only pure, unadulterated, and overwhelming love completely enveloping his existence. All those horrific, unspeakable nightmares of his past life. Since he has forgotten them, let them remain buried forever. And that includes me, 3 years ago. I specifically tasked Su Jinyan to hand the amnesiac version of him, a fabricated final suicide note. In his mind, I am already his tragically deceased, permanently resting wife. Suddenly, the old auntie lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, saying, I heard that the powerful county magistrate's daughter has also set her sights squarely on him. She is recognized as the absolute #1 beauty across our entire county, possessing a stunning face capable of completely toppling empires. There isn't a single man alive who wouldn't fall for her, so your chance is probably 0, sweetheart. That is perfectly fine, I murmured, turning my body around to quietly walk away. He genuinely deserves to encounter an infinitely better unstained woman. And just like that, I quietly brushed past my former husband and my precious children. A gentle breeze suddenly swept through the air, completely blurring my vision for a fleeting second, and gently brushing away the heavy tears pooling at the corners of my eyes. Excuse me, miss. Is this yours? A piercingly familiar voice suddenly echoed from right behind me. My heart instantly skipped a violent beat. I slowly turned around. Su Zhao stood there, holding the silk veil that the wind had just swept off my face. I silently nodded, and he gracefully knelt down on one knee, gently setting his precious little girl on the ground. Fengar, go return this to the big sister, he instructed softly. The little girl extended both of her tiny hands, carefully placing the veil back into my palms. She blinked her wide, round, curious eyes, scanning my face intently, before suddenly crying out in pure excitement. Daddy, this big sister looks exactly like the mommy from our drawing. Fengar, stop this at once. You mustn't be so rude. I am incredibly sorry my daughter is still very young and undisciplined. Please do not take her wild imagination to heart, miss. Not at all. You watch it. She is absolutely adorable. I choked out. We politely exchanged formal bows of courtesy, before turning our backs to walk our separate ways. But after taking just a few steps into the crowd, I simply couldn't restrain myself from looking back, only to find that he too had stopped and turned around to gaze at me. Have we perhaps met somewhere before? He asked, a trace of confusion in his voice. Seeing my absolute stunned silence, he quickly added, my deepest apologies, miss. That was incredibly forward and inappropriate of me. He offered a polite nod before turning around to walk away into the distance. I stood completely frozen in a daze, staring blankly at the retreating figures. My lady, is that truly you? Oh my god, I genuinely thought you had already... Song Jiwon and Soo Jin came rushing toward me with frantic, breathless steps. She threw her arms around me, weeping so hard she could barely breathe. Soo Jin had clearly informed her about the horrific state of my poisoned body, and since I had vanished for so long without a trace. She assumed I had already succumbed to death. She looked at me trembling and asked, "You refuse to reunite with us? Is it because you still hold a grudge over what happened all those years ago?" I froze. I used to obsess over the fact that I had systematically annihilated the entire Song clan. To Song Jiwon, did my blood-soaked vengeance make me just as monstrous as the tyrannical Song Ming? But she gripped my hands tightly and cried, "My lady, my father and the Song clan brought absolute ruin upon themselves. Every single horrific crime they committed was entirely of their own making. Each and every atrocity was an unpardonable capital offense against the heavens. None of that blood has anything to do with you. You were the ultimate victim in their cruel game. It was the Song family that owed you a lifetime's worth of blood and tears. In fact, looking at the grand scheme of things, I too passively enjoyed the luxurious privileges they violently plundered from others. So it was only right that I, Li Ying, should face total condemnation right alongside them. Yet it was you who went to hell and back to secure this fresh start for me. Now I am merely the eldest daughter-in-law of the Su family. And above all, I am your older sister. So please, I beg you, stop letting this crushing guilt consume your soul." "Sister Song?" Soo Jin chimed in, gently breaking the heavy silence. "But what about Su Jiao and your precious children? Can your heart truly bear to just walk away and leave them behind forever?" Ultimately, we all walked back together to the gates of Yunjin Academy. Faced with an intensely bewildered and thoroughly confused Su Jiao, Soo Jin stepped forward to clarify the situation, saying, "Second brother, she really is your lawfully wedded wife. As for the complicated truth behind everything, I'll let her explain it to you personally." Song Jiwon and Soo Jin immediately pulled me to the side, hilariously repeating the exact gossip the older village woman had told me earlier. "Listen, Su Jiao is an absolute hot commodity on the marriage market right now. He's a brilliant young scholar and breathtakingly handsome to boot. Eager matchmakers have literally broken down his threshold trying to secure a match. Yet he hasn't given a single one of them the time of day. They explicitly advise me to have an immense amount of patience, and to use all my charm to properly coax him back. Even if he plays hard to get at first, don't you dare get discouraged," they urged. "After all, you have the entire rest of your lives to make up for lost time." A few moments later, Su Jiao and I stood side by side, strolling quietly along a serene path filled with singing birds and blooming flowers. I took a deep breath and broke the silence, saying, "What if I told you that back then I was terminally ill and riddled with a deadly toxin, because I was preparing myself for the absolute worst case scenario. I chose to leave you that heartbreaking farewell letter as a final release. But over these past 3 years, I was actually away fighting for my life and getting treated. The only reason I didn't dare to approach you earlier, somewhat, was because the closer I got to home, the more paralyzed with fear I became. Would you believe me?" He nodded softly without a single shred of hesitation before asking, "Are you fully cured now?" "Yes, I'm completely healthy," I replied with a relieved smile. Hearing that, he softened completely. It seemed he wasn't nearly as difficult to win over as they said. My hand slowly and tentatively glided over toward his, gently hooking my pinky around his slender fingers. He visibly stiffened for a fleeting microsecond, but he absolutely did not pull away from my touch. Emboldened by his silent acceptance, I gathered a bit more courage, and boldly slid my entire hand completely into his grasp, interlocking our fingers tightly one by one. As our warm palms pressed firmly against each other, my chest tightened, making my heart flutter at an absolute million miles an hour. The atmosphere between us became intensely charged and incredibly sweet. "We used to hold hands and walk just like this all the time," I whispered. He let out a soft, gentle grunt of agreement, saying, though his cheeks were flushing with a crimson hue that completely mirrored my own blushing face. "Before today, did you ever try to picture what kind of person your mystery wife was?" I teased. "I actually thought about it all the time," he admitted softly. "I constantly wondered what sort of incredible woman could make my legendary older brother and sister-in-law instantly well up with tears at the mere mention of her name. I wondered what kind of unparalleled maiden could have blessed me with 2 such breathtakingly adorable children. Try as I might, I could never fully conjure up her face in my mind. But deep down, my soul knew one thing for certain. She would look absolutely nothing like any ordinary lady I had ever crossed paths with. Until the exact microsecond you finally manifested before me today, and a profound voice echoed in my heart whispering that my true wife was always meant to look exactly like you." Listening to his heartfelt confession, an involuntary radiant smile spread across my face, while the corners of his own lips curved upward into a tender mirroring grin. Superficial memories can easily fade and dissolve into nothingness, but the raw essence of true love remains permanently engraved into the very marrow of our bones. The moment the destined soulmate finally reappears, that dormant sacred bond is instantly and effortlessly reawakened. To be fair, running the Yunjin Academy was never meant to be a lucrative money-making venture. The household's primary source of income actually stemmed from the sale of exquisite calligraphy and paintings, and between Suchao's masterpieces, Song Jiwan's elegant strokes, and Su Jinian's dynamic art. Their collective artwork was absolutely elite premium-tier craftsmanship, meaning there was zero worry about them lacking eager buyers. However, they were all profoundly refined, gentle scholars at heart, who possessed absolutely zero cunning business instincts, allowing sketchy middleman brokers to completely rip them off and pocket the vast majority of their profits. But the moment I officially stepped into the picture, I took absolute dictatorial control over the entire art distribution and sales operation, and our household's net revenue instantly skyrocketed by several orders of magnitude. Meanwhile, Papa Su and Mama Su were the absolute embodiment of pure-hearted angelic elders. The boundless affection they showered upon Song Ziwan, Su Zhao, and myself proved that they genuinely cherished us as their very own flesh and blood. All the parental warmth and validation that Song Ziyuan and Su Zhao had been brutally denied by their own biological monster parents was now being overwhelmingly compensated tenfold by the saintly Su family. And within the warm embrace of these two beautiful elders, I constantly caught the radiant, comforting shadows of my own late father and mother. I suppose all parents across this earth who harbor unconditional love for their children fundamentally share the exact same gentle, nurturing soul, don't they? The only minor detail that left us feeling completely amused, yet slightly exasperated, was the fact that they suffered from the ultimate case of extreme doting grandparent syndrome, utterly spoiling Littlefinger and Bauer straight into absolute high heaven. They treated the toddlers like delicate sugar, terrified they might melt if held too tightly, and cradled them like priceless porcelain, paralyzed by the fear that they might suffer a single scratch. But as I watched them laugh, I couldn't help but think, if my own beloved father and mother were still alive today, they would undoubtedly be doing the exact same thing, spoiling their precious grandchildren to absolute infinity. But honestly, what does a little harmless spoiling even matter? Children who are thoroughly nurtured in an environment of absolute pure love, and raised alongside so many wonderfully affectionate, deeply caring and dynamic parental figures, could never truly turn bad or become hopelessly ruined anyway. Over the next few months, I orchestrated several more lucrative business ventures, and once our family savings grew into a massive financial fortune, I allocated a significant portion of the capital to fund and establish a massive sanctuary complex, specifically designed to house and protect completely homeless, abandoned orphans. Whenever I looked into the eyes of those vulnerable souls, it felt as though I was staring directly at a haunting reflection of my own painful past. I had been incredibly blessed to cross paths with so many beautiful saintly protectors, allowing me to finally break through the darkness and witness the radiant moonlight. Now I desperately want to pay it forward and become the ultimate shield for the helpless. These precious children will never again have to endure the agony of wandering the streets, never again be brutally trafficked and passed around by merciless slave traders, never again be cruelly deceived into becoming human poison vessels for lethal experiments, and never again suffer from the freezing cold or starvation. From this moment on, they will have hot steaming meals, to nourish them warm beds to rest their weary heads, infinite access to books and education, and incredibly compassionate mentors guiding them step by step, teaching them how to flawlessly discern absolute right from wrong, while arming them with invaluable life skills to thrive in this world. They will grow up to become profoundly warm-hearted, highly responsible members of society, eventually transforming into the next generation of protective shields, ready to shelter other broken souls trapped in the pouring rain. Even after I had officially integrated into the Su household, a continuous stream of persistent matchmakers still swarmed our doorstep to pitch marriage proposals to Su Zhao. Worse yet, toxic local gossips began spreading malicious rumors behind my back, sneering that I had zero legal status or official title, claiming I was just some shameless woman who had desperately forced herself onto him, in their judgmental minds. Su Zhao's legitimate first wife had long since passed away, meaning an outsider like me, who had suddenly materialized out of nowhere, was someone they absolutely refused to acknowledge or respect. Personally, I couldn't care less. This petty, toxic chatter didn't possess the power to scratch my skin. Su Zhao, however, fiercely stepped up and proposed that we hold a lavish official wedding ceremony. He firmly declared that once the entire world witnessed him taking a wife, those annoying matchmakers would never dare set foot in our home again. Furthermore, he smugly added that those eligible bachelors who had laid eyes on me would instantly stop sniffing around to pry into my marital status. It turned out I wasn't the only one fiercely guarding what was mine. With a blushing face, I softly nodded my agreement, And it was only after the fact that I uncovered the most beautiful secret. From the exact literal day I had returned to this town, Suzhou had been quietly and meticulously crafting a magnificent bridal gown for me with his own hands. The moment my eyes fell upon the stunning fabric boasting embroidery that was surprisingly flawless. But compared to the absolute masterclass of craftsmanship covering the rest of the dress, was a strikingly detailed crimson bridal veil causing my emotions to completely overflow as hot tears welled up in my eyes, as my fingers gently traced the beautifully stitched mandarin ducks on the fabric. I realized this specific piece of handiwork felt profoundly different from the rest. Right then, I heard Su Jiao murmur, sounding incredibly shy and flustered. I actually embroidered that myself. I once stumbled upon an ancient legend stating that if a bride's sacred wedding veil is stitched with the absolute pure devotion of her lover's heart, the couple will receive the eternal divine blessing of the god of marriage. The deeper the devotion, the more flawless and beautiful their lifelong union will be. I can't believe you actually buy into those fairy tales, I teased through a watery smile. Besides, why didn't you just ask me to embroider it instead? Because my devotion to you is infinitely deeper than yours could ever be. That single line completely shattered my emotional dam, sending tears streaming down my face and utterly panicking poor Suzhou. In return, I playfully pulled out an admittedly hideous, poorly stitched scented sachet. Yet he happily tied it right to his waist with absolute pride, beaming as he declared it to be the most breathtakingly beautiful sachet in the entire world. Since I had no surviving biological family to send me off, I had originally planned to commence the bridal procession directly from my orphan sanctuary, keeping everything low-key. But the literal day before the grand wedding, an absolute powerhouse delegation from the imperial capital of Chang'an suddenly descended upon our town. There was Xiang Kui, the historic absolute first ever female imperial official of the Great Xia Empire, my fiercely loyal best friend Xiang Chuan, the legendary Supreme Flying Cavalry General of Great Xia, who also happened to be Xiang Kui's formidable husband, alongside the reigning emperor of the Great Xia Empire himself, traveling incognito under the alias Yun Xing, my protective adoptive older brother, and finally the Supreme Empress Dowager of Great Xia, who was none other than my doting godmother. The exact moment this legendary entourage arrived, they immediately seized the most exorbitantly expensive luxurious mansion in the entire city, proudly hanging a massive golden wooden plaque above the main gates, officially naming it the Yun Estate, bearing the personal authentic signature of the emperor himself. This absolute power move sent shockwaves through the entire city, throwing the locals into total chaos. And honestly, how could they not lose their minds? Whose family estate boasts a main entrance sign personally handwritten by the Lord of the Empire himself. What kind of ordinary bride sending-off party consists of the nation's Supreme Flying Cavalry General and the most powerful pioneering female official in imperial history, not to mention that mysterious unidentifiable older brother and godmother pair, who clearly radiated an aura of supreme absolute royalty. I was ceremoniously escorted into the magnificent Yun Estate, where the Supreme Empress Dowager personally took the bridal comb to style my hair, chanting, "With the first stroke, we comb your hair to the very end. With the second stroke, we wish you a long life growing beautifully old together until your hair turns completely white. With the third stroke, we bless your home to be overflowing with the sanctuary of children and grandchildren. And with the fourth stroke, we weave a lifetime of absolute abundance, harmony, and flawless prosperity. Your beloved father and mother are undoubtedly watching over you from the heavens right now, and seeing you radiant, safe, and happy today. Their spirits must be filled with absolute profound joy." As she spoke, a single tear of pure happiness escaped my eye. She then slowly withdrew a flawlessly radiant jade hairpin from her own hair, and gently secured it into my braided locks, whispering, "On the day I got married, your beloved mother personally gifted this sacred heirloom to me. Now I pass this legacy on to you, praying that you and your husband enjoy a lifetime of absolute bliss and tranquility." "Thank you, godmother," I choked out as she offered one final emotional sigh. "That young man is incredibly blessed to have won your heart." Just as I was preparing to step out of the bridal suite, Peiyu quietly walked into the room, causing the surrounding maids to silently and respectfully disperse. Looking at him now, every single one of his movements radiated absolute commanding authority, and an aura that was profoundly regal. I was currently adorned in a magnificent gown he had custom ordered for me, one that was infinitely more luxurious and opulent than the one Su Jiao had crafted. His intense gaze lingered upon my breathtaking bridal attire, his eyes welling with an ocean of profound comfort and pride, as he silently knelt down to gently adjust the flowing train of my skirt. Finally reaching deep into his royal robes, he slowly pulled out a stunningly familiar jade bracelet, the exact same token that I had strictly rejected and returned to him twice before in our past lives. "You are pleased wear this," he murmured softly. "In this lifetime, I am content to be nothing more than your protective older brother." Without a word, I willingly extended my wrist toward him. Look at you finally learning to accept my gifts without a fight. He chuckled softly, a bittersweet smile breaking across his handsome face, before gently sliding the cold jade bracelet over my hand. The moment I officially stepped outside the massive gates of the Yoon estate, a miles-long, breathtaking sea of crimson bridal gifts lined the streets, stretching all the way to the entrance of the Yoon Jin Academy, where we picked up my handsome groom, Sujao, before parading triumphantly around the entire city center, and ultimately returning to the Yoon estate for the final ceremony. That's right, Pei-yu had strictly decreed that a daughter of the Yoon family only takes a matrilocal husband and never marries out, as the intimidating ultimate brother-in-law. He held absolute authority and his word was absolute law, meaning not a single soul in the entire empire dared to voice a objection. Inside the grand, beautifully decorated ceremonial hall, Pei-yu firmly held my hand, guiding me step by step across the floor, toward a waiting Sujao before deliberately taking my palm, and placing it firmly and reverently into Sujao's steady grasp, uttering a solemn, profound blessing. May the two of you soar together like inseparable mandarin ducks, bound by an eternity of absolute, unyielding happiness. The chaotic wedding feast literally stretched from the very beginning of the main avenue to the absolute end of the town, ensuring that every single bystander received a massive plate of food, effectively feeding the entire city's population. Watching the sheer madness unfold, my heart couldn't help but panic a little, thinking, this is absolutely unhinged. Did Pei-yu literally empty out half of his personal imperial treasury for this and spent it all directly on me? But I never got a chance to actually ask him about it. I later found out that the moment he watched me complete the formal wedding vows, he quietly left the city without tasting a single bite of the wedding feast. On the magnificent day of my grand wedding, the Great Xia Empire simultaneously rolled out 3 historic monumental imperial decrees to celebrate. First, a comprehensive empire-wide amnesty for all prisoners. Second, a total exemption from all taxes for the next 3 years. And third, the groundbreaking announcement officially allowing women to participate in the imperial examination. After the chaos settled, Su Jinian patted her chest and whispered to me, "Good lord, that completely terrified me." I genuinely thought he was going to crash the wedding and steal the bride. I just smiled softly, thinking, how could that ever happen? We literally grew up together from early childhood. Above anything else, we are family. I understand his core character better than anyone. At his absolute center, his true soul is profoundly righteous and benevolent. He would never in a million years, nor could he ever bear to force me into doing anything against my own free will, because he knows my unyielding personality inside out. I would rather shatter completely as a precious jade than remain whole as a worthless clay roof tile, allowing me to wear the custom-tailored bridal gown he commissioned, and accepting the precious heirloom bracelet he offered, was already the absolute maximum extent of his emotional maneuvering, and honestly demanding this tiny bit of compromise was not unreasonable at all. Furthermore, everything he did by traveling thousands of miles to this backwater town was entirely because as my ultimate maternal family representative, and my protective older brother, he desperately wanted to provide me with absolute social leverage. He sincerely wishes nothing but supreme happiness for me, and I too wholeheartedly pray for his absolute peace and prosperity. Later that night, in the dim bridal chamber, taking advantage of Sujao's temporary absence, I quickly changed into the special bridal gown he had personally stitched for me. Yet I suddenly couldn't find the sacred bridal veil he had embroidered. When Su Chao finally walked back inside and saw me, he blinked in surprise, asking, "Why did you switch gowns?" "Because you poured your entire heart into preparing this for me," I replied, "and I refuse to let you have any regrets." "It doesn't matter," he whispered, pulling something out. I carried that custom veil close to my chest the entire time. Hey. So the god of marriage has undoubtedly witnessed and blessed our union. Well, that explains it. No wonder I couldn't find it anywhere. It turns out he had been holding onto it the entire time. I looked up into his eyes and asked him about my suddenly materialized high-powered family. "Are you dying to know the truth behind their identities?" He smiled gently and replied, "Yes. And yet no. I say yes because I desperately want to know every single facet of your life. But I say no because I know that if it were safe to share, you would have already told me everything long ago. If their powerful statuses are secrets that can never be openly discussed with outsiders, then let them remain buried forever. All that truly matters to me is that you actively chose to become my beloved wife, vowing to stay right here by my side and watch over our precious children, staying right by the side of both myself and our child. That choice alone is already the most monumental blessing the heavens could ever bestow upon me, and absolutely nothing else matters." In reality, what Su Jiao completely failed to realize was that the Empress Dowager had secretly brought a profound gift specifically for him. Though his biological father couldn't make the journey due to his failing health, he had poured his entire soul into crafting a pristine, solid gold ceremonial marriage wand for his son, symbolizing perfect alignment and lifelong fulfillment. It carried the deeply heartfelt, sincere blessing of an aging father for his long-lost boy. That golden wand was ultimately delivered directly into his hands, disguised under Sujinian's name to protect the secret. The Empress Dowager had remarked with a soft smile, who could have ever predicted this? That in the end, it would be the daughter of the Jin family who would achieve his ultimate salvation. He truly is a profoundly lucky soul, to have ultimately crossed paths with a woman like you. But looking back, wasn't it actually he who completely saved and redeemed me? I had once approached him with a heart completely riddled with deception and secrets, yet he offered me nothing less than absolute, unyielding, and pure trust. I had long since reached a point where I stopped believing in the concept of love, paralyzed by the sheer terror of ever opening my heart again. Yet he bombarded me with the most transparent, unconditional affection imaginable, forcing me to navigate through a labyrinth of lies and illusions, until the only thing left standing within my soul was absolute raw truth. My gaze burned with an intense burning passion, as I stared directly at the incredibly refined, gentle scholar who was now officially my husband. A single moment of this beautiful wedding night is worth more than 1,000 bars of gold, I whispered. I slowly and deliberately leaned closer to press my lips against his, only for his slender fingers to gently cover my mouth, halting me in my tracks. Hold on just a moment, my beloved wife, he murmured softly. We haven't formally lifted your bridal veil yet. Ugh, this absolutely unhinged devotion to tradition. He carefully pulled out the crimson fabric, draping it right back over my head, and with absolute meticulous precision used a wooden rod to formally lift my veil. The very second it cleared my face, I swiveled around and aggressively pinned him down onto the mattress. All right, my handsome husband, the bridal veil has been officially lifted, I purred. The red candles are burning, the sensual incense is lit, and I've even set the mood for you. And I've even gone through the trouble of scattering these fragrant peach blossoms all over the bed. There are absolutely zero excuses left. Leaning down, I firmly pinned his wrist to the bed and completely devoured his lips in a kiss, pouring every single drop of my accumulated devotion into that singular embrace. And this time, he effortlessly matched my aggressive energy, reciprocating with a fierce burning passion that perfectly mirrored my own deep affection. We had both been utterly broken, trapped in darkness, and completely overwhelmed by confusion, shedding a lifetime of bitter tears. Yet through it all, our souls stubbornly refused to ever give up on one another, even when the storm raged violently around us, threatening to tear our world apart. This beautiful life proved to be absolutely worth living in the end.